We are going to have an opportunity to make a little bit of introductions again after the traditional territory acknowledgement. I also have some information with regards to regrets. We have regrets from Anju Mystery of Down Syndrome Association, and Cynthia has sent in her resignation. Jennifer is going to be contacting the association, and hopefully we can figure out who's going to take Cynthia's spot. All right, so I'm calling the meeting to order, and our first order of business is the approval of the agenda. Now, there are some changes to the agenda. We are going to defer the superintendent's report, 8.1. We are also going to move 8.4 up to 8.1. So 8.4 is now going to become 8.1. The original 8.1 is going to be deferred for the next meeting because we have a lot of reports, as you can see. Yes?
Yeah. Should we vote on that change?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That was the
Okay.
next, yes, that was the next thing I'm gonna do. Okay, so those are the changes to the agenda. With those changes, who would like to move for the agenda with those changes? Thank you, Barb. Second?
We need to majority.
Yeah, seconder? Yes, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Okay, and now we'll move on to the acknowledgement of traditional territory. Now, there may be some exciting changes next time. I have made some suggestions about maybe having somebody come in and explain to us the different First Nations whose land that we occupy, to come in and explain to us about their culture. I think that would be an interesting thing to do. Who knows? Meanwhile, we move on to number 2. Okay, carry on.
The land upon which we work, live, and sustain ourselves is the ancestral and treaty lands of the Michizagig Anishinaabe, also known today as the Mississaugas of the Credit, the rightful caretakers and title holders of this land. We also recognize the rich pre-contact history and relationships, which include the Anishinaabe and the Ongwe Hongwe.
Since European contact, this land continues to be home to Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. As responsible community members, we value the diversity, dignity, and worth of all people.
Colonialism displaced and dispossessed Indigenous peoples of their ancestral land
And continues to deny their basic human rights, dignities, and freedoms.
We are committed to learning true history to reconcile, make reparations, and fulfill our treaty obligations to the original peoples and our collective responsibilities to the land, water, animals, and each other for future generations.
Thanks. I don't know about you, but I've seen that 3 times. And I think it would be nice for this, the land acknowledgement to have, and for me, for the land acknowledgement to have meaning, I like to learn something new. So, I'm excited. Now we're gonna do the introductions again, because I think a lot of us, I know I'm having trouble with names. So we're gonna go around, and what I'd like you to do is introduce yourself and tell us how you would prefer to be called upon. And we'll start with Jennifer. Jennifer Knight.
I'm Jennifer Knight. I'm representing Easter Seals. And are you talking pronouns or just Jennifer?
Jennifer, yeah, when I go, Jennifer, would you like?
Yeah, that's fine.
Jennifer's.
Although we may not want to use Jennifer, we might want different things.
It does get a little.
There's too many Jennifers. Jen is fine, if that's easier. I can go by Jen.
Thanks.
Justin Johal, Justin Johal from Vantage Board 9 and 10. And I think it's up for.
Great, thank you.
I'm Anne Smith from Brampton, Canada, Community Living. What else did you ask for?
So you're okay with me referring to you as Anne?
Okay with what?
You refer, when I call upon you to second a motion or make a motion or whatever, Anne is good.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Wes McDonald. I'm the alternate for Optic, and I would like to be addressed in song. Or Wes, alternately.
Laura Fernandez, Board Reporter.
Jack Eby, Superintendent, Special Education and Social Emotional Learning.
And I'm Shelley Foster, and I represent Voice for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Kids, and I like to be just called Shelley.
I represent Autism.
Barb Sear, I represent the Association for Bright Children of Ontario Peel Chapter, and you can call me Barb.
Hi, I'm Jeff Clark. I'm the school board trustee for Mississauga Wards 9 and 10, and you can call me Jeff.
I don't know if this is, no, my name is Leanne Mallet. I am the executive director of the Learning Disabilities Association of Peel Region. I am the alternate for Carol Ogilvie, who is running late, and I'm fine with Leanne.
Thank you.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Jessie Jill, and I represent Ontario Parents for Visually Impaired Children.
I'm Nicole Bucket and I represent Fragile X Research Foundation of Canada. And you can call me Nicole.
And we had Dorothy join us. Dorothy, would you like to introduce yourself and how you would like for me to call upon you?
Good evening, my name is Dorothy Petty and I represent FAS for the Peel Chapter.
And you're okay with me just saying, Dorothy, do you mind? And how about the folks at the back? We have some faces at the back that we've recognized and some new faces that.
Hi there, my name is Cyrus Lamont, and I'm the Central Coordinating Principal for staff.
Hi, my name is Sambal Kapkov. I'm the Coordinating Principal for Secondary Education in Curriculum Instruction and Assessment.
Hello, I'm Lisa Brazil, Coordinator, Special Education for Secondary Schools.
Hi there, I'm George Solonitis. I'm one of the coordinating principals of Cecil, and you can call me George.
Hi, my name is Dr. Myri Nurse, Andrea. Please call me Andrea. And I'm the psychology manager in the North.
Hello, I'm Dr. Rami Gill. Please call me Rami, and I am the psychology manager in the South.
In the back, are you?
My mic's not working.
Okay, we can still hear you.
I'm Janet President, acting senior manager, social emotional learning.
My mic isn't working either. My name is Erla Jacket, and I'm one of the central coordinating principals in Cecil.
No? Okay. Okay, we're good. We're good. This is, in the back is another trustee, by the way, who's decided to come in and
Just observing.
observe it. Listen. Thank you very much for your participation. All right, so the minutes of the last meeting, March 28th, and I'm really sorry, I was unable to attend it. But I understand that. Oh, sorry, I missed the declaration of conflict. I'm writing too many things on my piece of paper. Declaration of conflict of interest. Nobody's hands up? Okay, now the approval of the minutes. And I'd like to thank Fauzia for stepping up and being the chair. Thank you, Fauzia. So the minutes from the last meeting, since I wasn't here, does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns with regards to them? Yes, Barb?
On page 2, the fifth line up from the bottom, it says 5% of students scored in the 96th percentile. I think that should probably be at or above, should it not be?
Say, I did.
Anybody else? Yes, Sarah?
So the presentation on the parent of concern protocol, we were supposed to get copies of their presentation, and I haven't
Yes.
received that. I don't know if anybody else has. I would like to get a copy of that.
Noted. Anybody else? Okay, so with the change, Barb, would you like to move for approval of the agenda?
Yes.
Okay. The change, yeah, with the at or above instead of in. Yeah. And would you like to second that, Anne?
Sure.
All in favor? Perfect, okay. Chair's request for written questions from committee members. I haven't received any notifications. And nobody's here for the motion of petition. Are there any public questions or delegations? Nope. Okay. We will move on to reports from officials and staff. And the first report, which is formerly 8.4, is the corrective reading tutoring program, and that's going to be presented by Sarah. So, Sarah, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. On February 17th, 2022, the Ministry of Education announced as part of its Learning Recovery Action Plan a fund to support students who would benefit from tutoring. This money was provided by the way of a transfer of payment agreement. On January 15th, 2023, the Curriculum Department contacted the Special Education Department to inquire whether they will be able to support them in the implementation of a tutoring program for special education students. The principal for CFPPA and the central team researched the best way to deliver a Tier 3 reading intervention based on the Right to Read report and the mathematical blended model, a digital component, as well as a teacher intervention program. Given the urgency to address the Right to Read report and support students with special education needs as they enter de-streamed classrooms, the department opted to go with the Tier 3 reading intervention model for tutoring. In collaboration with the purchasing department, we had to source a vendor that had enough qualified staff to offer a one-to-one Tier 3 reading intervention that was approved by the Right to Read. After investigating multiple vendors, LearnStyle was the only vendor that had enough human resources to support the implementation of a corrective reading tutoring initiative in Peel. Corrective reading is identified in the Right to Read report as an effective, evidence-based reading intervention. It is a Tier 3 intervention for students in grade 3 and up who are struggling with reading and who need support in decoding, fluency, and comprehension. The lessons follow a clear scope and sequence, and all concepts are taught to proficiency over several months. LearnStyle's reading intervention team consists of a core group of skilled reading intervention tutors that are trained and certified by NIFTY and IFDY. Their team leader has 20 years of experience as a special education consultant with large school boards, and the tutors have varied backgrounds, including and not limited to Ontario certified teachers, special education, social workers, ECEs, and ABA backgrounds. Their tutors work one-to-one virtually with students in grade 3 and up to help them build their skills using SRA corrective reading program. Each session provides direct instructions for 45 minutes a day. They're to take place 4 to 5 times a week. Each tutor provides ongoing reporting to the school and to the family with detailed feedback about students' progress. LearnStyle has dedicated approximately 57 tutors to Peel District School Board's tutoring project for special education students. They will be supporting approximately 220 students across the board through a pre-assessment screener. Each student's learning needs will be identified and programming will begin based on their strengths and areas of need. Taking into consideration the community's needs, the tutoring program will be provided during the instructional day for some students and after school and over the weekend for others. Following the release of the results from the Peel District School Board's 2018 census, it was established that there was an overrepresentation of students who identified as Black placed in Vocational 2 special education programs. And as a result, the Vocational 2 program was eliminated as a special education placement, and students who previously may have accessed this program would have been offered a placement at their local school. Associations on the Special Education Advisory Committee sought clarification regarding the board's plan to address the needs of students who were currently within the streamed program as a result of previous practices. This funding was used to address the needs of students who are currently placed within pathways that experience reduced post-secondary opportunities. The funding was used to address the needs of students who are currently placed within a pathway that experienced reduced post-secondary opportunities. The corrective reading tutoring program that was selected to address the literacy achievement gaps of students was revealed in the Right to Read report. Resources and implication. The LearnStyle corrective reading tutoring program costs about $1.3 million. LearnStyle provides tutors to implement this tutoring program to approximately 220 Peel District School Board students with IEPs. The program only impacts PDSB staff when delivered during the school day. Educators in the GLD program, intensive support, and ISSP will need to supervise and help students self-regulate during their direct intervention time. The project was also redirected assistive technology resource teachers to successfully set up the tutoring program. This tutoring project has also redirected the efforts and workload of the central team, coordinating principal of SIA, the CERT for assistive technology, since January 15, 2023. In the risk assessment, as this is a transfer of payment agreement, the funding for this program terminates at the end of the academic school year. The students participating in the program could choose to continue to work with LearnStyle or a different corrective reading provider at their own cost. Educators and family guardians involved with the program will receive progress reports that can inform the literacy needs for their students with the program in the next academic year. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Does anybody have any questions? Yes? Go ahead, Trustee Clark.
Okay, just clarification, transfer of payment agreement. Forgive my ignorance, but what is that?
If I may?
Go ahead.
It's a transfer of payment. It's money from the ministry that is given over the year to the boards, different boards all over Ontario. So they happen at different times of the school year.
And am I right in noticing a trend that these transfer payments are becoming more focused as to what kind of program that you can spend them on, whereas before they used to have a little bit more leeway.
So this particular funding was targeted for tutoring, and it came through the ministry as such, and that's what it was directed towards.
Sorry, can I ask? So once the school year is done, the funding is done, the care.
Sorry, can you turn your mic on?
Oh, sorry. Once the school year is done,
there's a report card that's provided to the parents, and then what transition plan, is there like a transition plan then for their next, because then they're then brought into regular streaming schooling, there is none of these classes. What is the transition then into, like, I know that there's a report card and then it's left for the parents, and then what happens? It's just.
So given that the communication between Learn Style tutors is going to be happening with the school and families, so the schools will have the same data that the families have about the students' reading progress. It will be up to each school to look at that progress on corrective reading and implement next steps for the academic school year.
Barb?
Maybe you said it, I missed it, but do you know what kind of reading program that Learning Style uses to teach students?
It's called SRA Corrective Reading. It is an evidence and research-based program that has been around and used for over 20 years in Peel now.
Thank you.
So you said that this was being done virtually. So do the students have actual physical books, or what exactly, how is this reading happening? Because I do believe that having access to actual paper and actual books and that sensory aspect is so important for literacy development.
So the texts that they are using are at that point going to be virtual. And students who are engaging in corrective reading, they're really building phonological skills. So they may not necessarily be reading whole sentences. They're very scope and sequence activities to build reading skills. That, of course, the classroom teacher is still responsible in providing the instruction using, texts with students. But this is an opportunity to have a very skilled educator in a very particular field provide some remediation.
Yes, Jeff?
Okay. Since this is a short-term program, like public, through the schools, will it be totally clear to the parents that this is a one done, and if you want more, you have to pay for it yourself, so that there's absolutely no, and that they understand, the consequences of that?
So parents were made quite clearly aware that this is a once opportunity, and that it will not continue after this academic year, and that it is through a transfer of payment. So communication that went home to both parents from our department and the school included that information.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer?
Do we have any data yet on how well the students are progressing, or will we have at the end of it to see what advance it's in?
So we as a department have been collecting some data right now. We have a location in our Teams Drive where Learn Style uploads the data. However, given that we are assessing still and placing children on where they're going to begin, we don't have the type of data that we could actually share at this point. It's very preliminary.
At the end,
when they actually receive their full 40 to 50 hours of tutoring, then we will definitely have.
So we've got a baseline right now, then we'll be able to see where they are. I'd be happy to see that at a state meeting in the future. Great.
Jeff? Do you know what you wanted to say?
No.
Okay. Okay. Would you like to move for receipt of the report then, and maybe bring up your idea later on?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we are going to move on to item 8.2, which is the PRC overview. Do we move on in a second? Is for receipt?
I can second.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. IPRC overview by George Sultana. Sorry, George, go ahead.
So thanks so much. George is going to give us some information with regards to IPRCs, and I just want to loop back to where this report is coming from. So this is a result of some requests that were made in previous meetings, questions that we had received via email. So it's not part of our usual practice, but rather than answering each question individually from a variety of sources, we thought it would be helpful to put it all together in one comprehensive report at the same time. And this way we can all ask the questions and get the answers at the same time. So that's sort of the impetus for this. And also to give some context, because some of what we'll be talking about a little bit later has to do with some changes that we're consulting about. So, and IPRCs may be impacted by these changes. So it was helpful to have all of these things on the same agenda at the same time. So I just wanted to give a bit of context. And that said, over to you, Coordinating Principal George Sultanatis.
Thanks, Jennifer, and through you, Chair. I always like to preface that I'm relatively new to the position, and I also understand that there are relatively new members to the position. So I do want to give a high overview of an IPRC. So I do apologize if this is information that some of us are very well versed in. So next slide, please. So what is an IPRC? An IPRC is a formal committee mandated by the Ministry of Education that meets and decides if a student should be identified as exceptional, and if so, the placement that will best meet the student's need. An IPRC is composed of at least 3 persons, one of whom must be a principal or supervisor officer of the board. A school board trustee may not be a member of an IPRC. Next slide, please. Some underlying principles. For students with special education needs, the Peel District School Board is committed to providing programs and support services whenever possible in home schools, providing a range of placements, providing a focus of inclusive practices in our schools and as an integral part of school culture. And in accordance with Ontario Regulation 181/98, placement in a homeschool classroom with special education support is the first placement to be considered. The Peel District School Board continues the commitment to support students who are not formally identified through the IPRC process. So during the IPRC, the committee will discuss and review a student's portrait, including the strengths and educational needs. Oh, next slide, please. I'm sorry. I'll start again. The committee will discuss and review a student's portrait, including the strengths and educational needs with parent caregivers, and discuss whether special education, identification, and placement is recommended. The committee is required to make one of the following decisions. The student is exceptional, and special education placement will be recommended. The student is not exceptional, and a special education placement is not recommended. The student is not exceptional, and a special education placement is recommended. And if the IPRC members need more information, the decision will be deferred. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of types of IPRCs, in-school IPRC being one of them. For every school with the board, for initial identification of most exceptionalities and annual review, the members of this committee include the principal, again, or supervisor officer, ISSP teacher, special education department head, and one other person, whenever possible, head of guidance or CERT. 3 members of the approved committee represents quorum. Regional IPRCs, which is another type, these IPRCs are for students seeking regional placement and for initial identification of a student that is seeking a regional placement. The members of this committee are dependent on the IPRC type. Next slide, please. So this slide shows in more detail the members of the committee and the presenting school staff. So in-school IPRCs, as mentioned, school principal, ISSP teacher, CERT whenever possible, head of special education, and a head of guidance whenever possible would be part of the IPRC members. Presenting school staff, this would be the staff that's presenting the student to the IPRC, would include classroom teacher, ISSP teacher, guidance counselor, and secondary or other appropriate staff. School psychologist or SLP may share additional assessment information. At regional IPRCs, program chair, principal or supervisor officer, CERT, coordinator, or itinerant teacher. In the case of multiple exceptionalities, the committee is composed of 2 special program coordinators and the program chair. And as far as presenting school staff at our regional IPRCs, they would include principal or vice principal, head of special education or special education teacher, classroom teacher, ISSP teacher, itinerant or other appropriate staff, and again, school psychologists or SLP may share additional information. So here are some regional IPRC dates from this year. And again, I'm not going to read through the dates, but we'll give you some time to look at the dates and if you want to take some notes. So the first one is behavioral, and that is a central IPRC, and the dates are in the right column. Then we have communication, which is a regional IPRC. These are all regional IPRCs. And then we have NFO, which is North Field Office, and MFO, which is Mississauga Field Office. You can see there are dates throughout the year, and in some cases, you'd see the NFO would have less dates, but the NFO does consistently have dates, and in some cases, we would use that date to present kiddos in the North Field Office. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on, sorry. I need bifocals. So regional IPRC dates continued. We have the gifted NFO. Shouldn't say gifted NFO, gifted, which is central. And then we have our NFO dates and our MFO dates. And again, I'm not going to read through the dates, but if someone wants to write down the dates and note them. GLD, and you notice there are less dates in the GLD as we're phasing out our GLD programs. And then we have our special needs ASD IPRC dates listed there. So next slide, IPRC chairs. So principals chair their own home school-based IPRCs. So all principals would be chairing IPRCs at their home schools. There is an application process for principals who are interested in participating as a member of regional IPRCs, and superintendents select members after reviewing applications. So there's a superintendent at the North Field Office, a superintendent at the Mississauga Field Office, which would be accepting applications anytime there's a call out for new chairs or program chairs. And they would have that selection process and for the names to undergo. So IPRC supports for members. IPRC annual review resources such as slide decks, flowcharts, and scripts are updated and shared annually with the system. There's ongoing consultation with special education resource teachers, coordinators, and central principals. Opportunities to attend in-person virtual training to review IPRC operation and procedure specific to IPRC type. Opportunity to review student portraits with CERTs, coordinators, and PSSP staff prior to IPRCs. And newly selected regional and central members are given opportunities to co-chair IPRCs. So as mentioned, after if a principal through the selection process is picked to chair, there are an opportunity for them to co-chair a couple times. So we're looking at mentors, trainer. The next steps, we will be providing updated training to gifted IPRC committees around students who participated and met gifted criteria in the NGAT pilot. That training is to happen in May, I think early May. Continue to provide a platform where all updated resources, which includes memos, flowcharts, scripts, pre-recorded training slides, identification and placement criteria, to be readily accessed by members, so providing a platform. And I know some of the central regional IPRCs use team drives to store this information, but we are going to continue to find a platform where it's easily accessible for everyone. Continue to provide in-person virtual sessions yearly as required for all members in school and regional. Continue to review, update, and share all resources as needed. And we are looking at updating our SES 3, which is our IPRC operating procedure in the near future. So that's our presentation.
Does anybody have any questions? Art?
So when parents make a request for an IPRC, what IPRC do they get?
So again, if a parent makes a request, it would be a request made to the home school, and hopefully through SRM conversations and depending on the portrait, we would look at either or, right? So specifically, if a parent is looking possibly, and I'm assuming Barb, if the parent's asking for a gifted identification, then we would provide them with an IPRC, a regional IPRC.
Okay, and what is the incentive for a principal to apply to be a chair of a regional IPRC meeting?
I could speak about myself and my journey, I guess, right? I always had, a passion to support students with special needs, and as part of my professional development and experiences in growing my own, professional resume, so to speak, giving an opportunity to learn systems. So there are incentives outside of that, we're not paying chairs or anything like that. It's on a volunteer basis, and every year we do have a call out, and we do have new chairs approaching for these experiences.
Okay, and are these principals required to participate in these training sessions, or is it just available if they choose to participate?
Yeah, so I can only speak to again this year, right? So or because I'm new to the role, so in the past there would be an invitation. Obviously, we cannot make it a requirement. We do offer it, and there are other opportunities for principals who can't make the training sessions, as far as pre-recording slide decks, opportunities to sit as part of the committee, co-chairing. So my understanding is it's never been mandated in the past. So Jennifer, I don't know if you want to take that.
Yeah, if I may just add to that. So there is an expectation that is shared at the time of the call out. That part of their responsibilities would be to engage in the training or updating of their skills or information. So to the degree that we can, we want to include that in the call outs going forward. And there does need to be an expectation, especially in light of some of the changes that we're talking about. So I think historically where it felt like things were pretty consistent and people maybe didn't feel the need to attend a training, but we are going to have it as an expectation certainly going forward, and we'll try and put that information out. So if you're volunteering to be an IPRC chair, you're doing so with the understanding that there's a bit of time commitment around attending some training.
So when principals apply, would there be a priority given to those who have training, or are they expected to do the training after they've applied and been accepted?
So there's a process, and I think we did cover it just now, but there's a recommendation that comes. So if that application is approved, then the expectation would be we get together with that group of new IPRC chairs and conduct a session. And I think George, you alluded as well to some recorded, so if you can't be there for a live session, then there's an expectation of getting the information in other formats, but we want to make it available in a variety of ways. But typically we do everybody at the same time, and then those recordings are also available as refreshers for those people who perhaps had the training the year before. If there were no changes, then they could go ahead and have a refresher, or they could also participate in the new training that's provided.
Okay, and is there a possibility that some of us or all of us could see some of this training?
Absolutely. I think that there's the key information, and we're going to talk about it a little bit in the action motion law, but the key information is always shared with CF. So that, again, that was the purpose for this presentation today is to go through the information, and then some of the other presentations as well will tell you about some of the changes that are coming up. So absolutely. We wouldn't do the training in its fullest extent because I don't think that time allows. But anything that is, this is new, this is different, this is an update, we definitely share that information with you.
Okay, that's great. And George, I missed some of those dates for the gifted IPRCs, so can I get those from you later?
Absolutely. I'll hang around.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for asking for the dates as well, Barb. If I may just say, the thing to keep in mind with regards to all dates, including IPRC dates, is that there is a potential for date changes due to conflicts. We've gotten over the whole weather conflict piece, I hope, at late April. So it's not likely that we're going to have cancellations due to weather, but we do still have significant conflicts in terms of things that end up on the calendar, where the people who would be chairing the meetings also need to be someplace else at the time, or something comes up and there has to be a change. So just to know that all of those dates, which will be provided, are subject to change.
Yep.
Jessie?
Because I'm new to all this, I'm gonna play the new card again. My first question is, when it goes to the school for IPRC, do all those cases for the students then, the needs, do they then get presented to regionals? Like it's first step, then second step, like do they all then go to regional?
No. So discussions would happen during our SRM meetings, formerly ISRCs, right? And depending on the portrait of the student, there would be a referral to either a school-based IPRC or regional-based IPRC, dependent on student portrait.
Okay, thank you for that. And then do they get revisited, or once they're kind of pushed through the regional IPRC, then that plan is put in motion and then they're not revisited, or they are?
No, they are. So
Okay.
there's an annual review process, so all students who are identified or non-identified, program and placement and identification gets reviewed annually. So and that typically happens around this time of year. So it's a really busy time at schools.
Jeff? Did you have a question?
Oh, yes, sorry. Long day.
Yeah.
Okay, I know that trustees aren't able to be on the committee, but is it possible for trustees to get the training?
I'm sorry, would you?
Yeah, it's okay, no problem. Okay, through you, Chair. I realize that trustees aren't able to be on the committee, but is it possible for trustees to get the training?
So I think what was asked before, I think it was Carol who had asked, will any of the elements of the training be shared at SEAC? And so I think that would be the best context to share that information.
Okay.
So again, there's an intention that all of the updates that will be shared with the IPRC chairs in terms of this is a change in procedure, a change in process, that information will be brought to SEAC in the future. So I think and typically that's the benefit of putting the agenda out ahead of time so that people know that that's one of the things that will be discussed at that particular SEAC meeting.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Leanne, did you have something to ask? Oh, okay. Anybody else? Yes, Jennifer?
I noticed that there were no dates for physical students. Is that because that's all done in the school now? It used to be at schools where it's okay.
So ASD special needs, so the last, so special needs ASD.
Okay, that encompasses not just data. Okay, gotcha, thanks.
So if IPRCs are being held at the school, it would be assumed then that all principals would be educating themselves as to what exactly the policies are and the procedures.
Absolutely, and again, we do send out system memos, we've created slide decks to review annual reviews and IPRCs that are again, sent out to, this should be provided office hours. So again, having a large group of 250 principals attend in-person training. So we're looking at creative ways, obviously, to keep principals up to date with our processes and our certs and Lisa, she's a secondary cert. Our certs, our special ed heads are also receiving this training, and often part of that consultation process we're available. So principals may call us or secondary or their certs or their coordinators. So there's a lot of supports and resources out there. We've just, and again, moving forward, right, looking at providing some annual training in some sort is something that we are thinking about.
Yeah, I think it's really important that all the principals understand that are trained in that and know how to identify, what the identifications are. And even if you're not going to formally identify a child, but you are going to have an IEP, there needs to be some training in there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Barb?
I just wanted to ask another question about the regional IPRCs. I've been to some of regional IPRCs where the school principal of the student is the chair of the IPRC. Is that still possible? I think it's not appropriate, which is why I'm asking.
Yeah. So I kind of defer to someone. I would think that someone else would be stepping in to present or having a different chair in place.
I thank you, George. I understand where the question is coming from, Barb. It's not something that I would expect to see. There should be an opportunity for a different principal to serve as chair, and then the principal of the child comes and presents that information alongside a teacher. That is typically what I see. So I'm not sure if that was some special circumstance. I can't speak to that particular instance. Please do bring it to our attention if that is happening, because we do want to have a bit of distance in these situations, a bit of space, so that you're having a bit of somebody who isn't quite so close, arm's distance, to chair the IPRC. So I think it really is going to depend. Even I've seen situations where in neighboring school, like the parents don't have to go far, but I think we do want to encourage that. Thanks for raising that.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Barb, would you like to move for receipt of that?
Sure.
And Jeff, would you like to second it? Thank you. Thank you so much for that, George. I think, I've been on this committee for a long time and been to some IPRCs, but it's good to be refreshed. So we're going to move on to 8.3, which is modifications in secondary, and we're going to hear from George again, and Lisa and Sumble. Yeah, Sumble. Thank you.
So I'm not going to start by saying I'm relatively new to the position, but I do want to welcome Sumble Kauka, who's coordinating principal of secondary education and curriculum, and Lisa, who's the coordinating secondary special education coordinator of secondary special education. Today we're here to talk about modifications in secondary, which is a relatively new practice in secondary schools. So if you go to the next slide, please. So setting some context, historically Ontario was the only province that had streaming for students in grade 9 for courses in English, math, science, geography, history, and French. The current government stated that eliminating streaming would bring Ontario's education in line with the rest of the country while ending discriminatory practice. Ontario began to de-stream the de-streaming process in September 2021. Grade 9 math courses began September 2021, grade 9 science courses September 2022, and grade 9 English courses in September 2023. In Peel, all secondary schools de-streamed grade 9 core English, math, Science, Geography, and French by September 2022. In grade 10, core, English, math, science, and history will be de-streamed by September 2023. So I leave that slide up for a little bit if folks do want to read the specific bullets. Okay, we could go to the next slide, please. So the duty to accommodate is necessary to address barriers in education that would otherwise prevent equal opportunities, access, and benefits for students with disabilities. That's from the Ontario Human Rights Commission, Section 8. Educators have a legal, moral, and ethical duty to accommodate the needs of students with disabilities who are adversely affected by the requirement, rule, or standard. There can be no set formula for meeting the duty to accommodate, as each student's needs are unique and must be considered and reflected in the student's individual education plan. The board's duty to accommodate the student is reflected in the IEP and may include accommodations which impact instruction, the environment and assessment practices, modifications which reduce the number and or complexity of the expectations stated in the Ontario curriculum at the student's grade level, and alternate programming developed to help students acquire skills and knowledge not represented in the Ontario curriculum. Examples of alternative programs include social skills programs, orientation, mobility training, and personal care programs. If we could go to the next slide, and Lisa, if you would like to continue.
Thanks, George, and through you, Chair. Accommodations are supports and strategies that are intended to remove barriers to learning, and they don't alter the overall curriculum expectations. So what that means is that if a student has accommodations in their programs, they're working on the same curriculum expectations as their classmates. And there are different types of accommodations that can be provided. Instructional accommodations change the way information is presented to the student. So an example of an instructional accommodation might be a teacher's providing photocopied notes to the student, and that allows the student to be able to follow along with the lesson without having to split their attention and having to write notes and pay attention to the lesson at the same time. Environmental accommodations change the physical space to support learning. An example of an environmental accommodation might be a student needs to be seated closer to the teacher in order to maintain focus. And then there's assessment accommodations, and that's changes in the way a student is required to demonstrate their learning. So an example might be to reduce written output. A student might be able to have oral assessments or use speech-to-text assistive technology to demonstrate and show their learning. Next slide, please. So modifications, like George mentioned, are part of our duty to accommodate, and they're provided in conjunction with accommodations and with all sound teaching practices that center the individual student learning needs. Unlike accommodations, modifications do alter the curriculum expectations. So what that means is that students' programming would have a reduction in either the number and or the complexity of the overall curriculum expectations. And so it depending on the extent of the modifications, a student may earn credit when they have a modified program. And, in some rare circumstances, there will be, there are extensive modifications that may result in the credit not being earned. Next slide, please. So through the student review process, teachers are developing an understanding of the learners in their classroom. They're creating rich student portraits to understand what the strengths and the needs of the students are, and using their strengths and their interests to sort of support their needs. They're providing multiple entry points for the students. They're engaging them through ongoing equitable instruction and assessment, providing accommodations and differentiated and culturally responsive and relevant instruction. And if after they've used everything in their toolkit and they've exhausted, the strategies that they have, they might not still, the student needs might still not be met. And so in cases like that, after consulting with the families, with the student, with the educational team, the student review meeting team may recommend modifications in order for the student to receive a engaging educational experience that meets their needs. And I think the point is here that the families and the parents and caregivers will never be surprised about an accommodation, because through the student review process, they'll be, engaged in the conversations around what types of modifications might be required, what are the extent of the modifications might be required, and that will, they'll be involved right from the get-go. Next slide, please.
So I'm going to speak to the work that we've been doing this year to support the modification process in the secondary schools this year. We started in August of 2022 by sharing a memo in the system that outlined to schools some information and guidance about the duty to accommodate, because that wasn't necessarily a practice in our D-stream programming. And that included protocols of accommodations, modifications, and alternative programs available to students. In September, a memo was shared with the secondary schools outlining the professional learning days through 4 early release days spread throughout the year, 2 in semester 1 and 2 in semester 2. The board provided some resources and professional learning materials that schools engaged with, specifically around different learner profiles and learner variability index. In semester 1, schools had an opportunity to come up with an individual plan based on the learning needs of their staff to personalize the learning for a second early release. In the second semester, the third early release continued to provide some time for teachers and staff to explore the resources and continue to make connections between the resources that were provided in semester 1 to the student needs and the D-stream programming and how modifications were playing out, and recognizing when modifications might be needed for students. And the fourth early release would have taken place in the latter part of the year, which is anytime from April to June, to consolidate the learning as we try to build an understanding of the needs of our diverse learners in secondary schools in D-stream classrooms. In December of 2022, the curriculum department and the special education department came together after developing some draft resources and collaborated on the development of those resources so that we could prepare to release them to the system. In February, which is at the beginning of the semester, we released the modifications memo and protocol to secondary schools, outlining some information and directions on how to report on modifications and record modifications on IEPs for secondary students. Next month in May of 2023, we are planning to meet with our student success committees and offer professional learning where we're co-learning on best practices that we've had throughout the year, as well as outlining some procedural guidelines and sharing that information with the student success teachers, the guidance teachers, and the special education heads and administrators at the secondary school level, knowing that they are the team that sit at those student review committees, are collaborating with parents and collaborating with the educators who are supporting the teaching and learning of the children to make collective decisions around when modifications are needed and what they would look like, and the impact those modifications may have on programming and credit accumulation. Next slide, please. So next steps we're looking at is providing professional learning and resources to our classroom teachers across secondary schools in the upcoming school year. We're looking to deepening teacher understanding of modifications and accommodations based on individual student portraits and what those modifications specifically within secondary curriculum could look like. And we are looking to collect data eventually on students receiving modifications or modified programs in D-stream classrooms and the impact on credit accumulation to further understand what supports are needed and how students are doing in our D-stream classrooms. That's the end of our presentation. Happy to take questions.
Do we have questions? Jennifer?
So I understand you're having a lot of communication with the students and the parents around this. In the past, I've found parents you may have been speaking with them, they're surprised, when they get to grade 8 or they get to grade 13, and they don't understand why their son or daughter isn't graduating or isn't getting the diploma they thought or doesn't have what they need. So what are we doing to make sure that's not still happening?
Through your chair. I think there's been a huge emphasis on training our staff and our administrators in schools on the student review process that happens every month in similar timelines around the IPRCs that George talked about, and inviting and including parents and families to be part of that process so that they're part of the decision-making and they understand what kinds of conversations are happening about their children and what the implications are of the decisions that they're making in relation to education. So definitely the transparency and the open lines of communication has been a huge focus. There was a PL day at the beginning of the school year in October, and that PL day was dedicated to the student review process, and all schools in PL focused on understanding the procedures around student review process so that we could build that understanding for that very reason that you mentioned.
When we're talking to parents and students, we're kind of showing them what their pathway looks like when these changes are made. So not just what's happening today and what we're changing, what does that mean for tomorrow and the next year? And do we have sort of those pathways laid out and those so that teachers and people who are running these meetings are able to say, okay, because we're doing this, this is what's going to happen, right?
So I think we've been thoughtful about not necessarily laying out a pathway. I think the focus has been to ensure that all students have as many open opportunities available to them, and talking about the implications more immediate, those decisions on a case-by-case basis as they come up. Because we wouldn't want to pigeonhole based on individual student decisions being made at one time. And I think that's a practice that we're shifting in terms of saying, here's your pathway and this is it for life now. It's this step-by-step decision-making with the intention of making sure that as many pathways are available to that student, and limiting the limitations of the pathways available to those students is definitely a focus.
Which means then we're having these meetings more regularly with parents and students so that each year it's clear where they're going. Right?
Correct, depending on how the student is performing as they go along, because the hope is that with accommodations and with modifications minimal to start with, and then moving forward that we are supporting the student with what they need, and then only considering limiting options as that becomes present. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah. So thank you for that question, and I think that that's something that really comes out of the new student review process. It's just being really transparent with parents and having them know that when we're making decisions, what the potential sort of pathways could be. That we do want to keep them open. We do want to sort of hold their child to high expectation and bridge those gaps. But by maybe making this decision for modifications where a credit isn't being earned, then this might be sort of the trajectory for that. And I think that's something that we're really working on as a department, is to really be clear and transparent with parents, so it's not a surprise. And in the end, they're thinking they're not surprised that the student or the child isn't going towards a particular pathway.
Go ahead,
I have always wondered, can accommodation go too far? Like, we discuss barriers to learning, but then there are low expectations of some students. And in the name of accommodation, barely anything happens. You just keep them safe at times. And I just made notes because I was, so what do we need to, what are you thinking in terms of giving the teaching team that ability to see beyond the disability, and so that these accommodations don't become this small little box and the student stays there?
Yeah, I'll start and then you can add. I think in our efforts to support teachers with D-stream classrooms where we have a diverse range of learners in our regular classrooms at secondary school, we've really intentionally focused on universal design for learning, which is meeting the needs of all of the students, regardless of the gaps that they're potentially coming in with, and culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, taking into consideration the student identities. And when we combine culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy, where we're meeting the students where their identities and trying to make learning relevant to them, along with universal design of learning principles. The goal is to work through those differentiated instructional practices and accommodations without going to modifications necessarily, but doing the best that a teacher can to meet the needs of the diverse learners in their classrooms before one would consider modifications. So the theme of high expectations keeps coming up for us in terms of ensuring that we believe that every student, which is the basis of our Empowering Modern Learners document, that we believe ultimately that at the end of the day, regardless of a student's learner portrait, everybody has the ability to be successful, and what do we as educators need to provide for those students to be successful, and how are we accommodating, differentiating our assessment and our instructional practices to best meet the needs of that learners while considering the assets of those students from a learner portrait.
Yeah, that's true because, I have seen some IPs which never go beyond the student walking from this room to that place. And this is a big issue. I know we start with acknowledging it, but yeah, accommodations can go way too far.
And just if I may also add that, we do want to hold our students to high expectations, and we don't want the IEP to sort of take the place of the, productive struggle and cognitive push that our students need in order for them to become independent learners, right? And so it's kind of like to step in a sort of aid and fade, position where we're supporting them, but we're really coaching them towards more independence so that they won't be as dependent on, the accommodations on their IEP.
So accommodations, are they still being recorded in an IEP? I'm just thinking about when a student moves on to university or college and they are approaching their disability office asking for accommodations. Often they're asked to provide an IEP that lists the accommodations that they had at school. So are those still being recorded, or this idea of differentiated instruction, is that going to be the new norm, and it won't be specifically written down, but universities and colleges will understand that this is happening?
Right, so it is a legal requirement for students with an exceptionality to have an individual education plan. So our students who are identified will have an individual education plan with the accommodations listed on that. And when they do go to post-secondary institutions, they'll also be required to bring a third-party documentation that supports the accommodations that they need, and have that something to, whether it's a processing difficulty or, whatever issue it is, and how that accommodation will support their identified need. So bringing those two documents together, I think, will help the accessibility offices in post-secondary.
Jennifer?
So heard a lot about universal design and differentiated instruction for many years now at this board. How are we making sure that our teachers are actually capable of taking in what they're learning and using it? What kind of a assessment? How is it? To be perfectly honest, we haven't seen a lot of it in my experience. Teachers being able to truly accommodate all the students in their classroom. So how are we monitoring and actually making sure that we're making a difference here with this training and that things are actually changing? So what's the measure, I guess, of what we're doing here?
Okay. Every school is required to have a school improvement and equity plan, and they need to set goals. All of them have to choose one of literacy or numeracy. And so the professional learning around those two subjects are grounded in principles of universal design for learning, culturally responsible and relevant pedagogy. And at the school level, the principal is monitoring the implementation of that school success plan and monitoring the data of student achievement using different forms of data, not just the usual achievement data that we are used to using historically, like report card data, EQAO data, but also looking at informal sources of data through observations, conversations, what we call street data, those multiples, anecdotes, those other stories, who are the students that we are not meeting, and what is it that we have to put in place to meet the needs of those students. So really, we've broadened our understanding of the use of data through training modules that have been available to all schools, and it is through the school improvement and equity plan and the administrators managing that process at the school level, where the instructional strategies would be assessed on whether they're being effective or not, and measured through student achievement data.
So is that report and data available to anyone? And is anyone monitoring it and actually checking in on those plans and how they're progressing against them? And the data they're collecting? It seems like the principal is responsible for it all in their school. They're not going to be very wanting to say that, oh yeah, we're doing a terrible job at this, right? Everybody's going to be doing a great job if it's the principal reporting on it. So how are we making sure that changes are actually happening?
So you're going to defer to our superintendent to answer that question.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's the responsibility of a number of different folks within the board. And so oftentimes families of school superintendents will be involved in those ongoing conversations with the schools. Because I agree, it may be difficult for a principal to say in some instances, we're really struggling in this area, but they're building up those relationships with their family school superintendent, who's there to help them, who's there to engage in those conversations, sit down, look at the data alongside the principal and say, okay, I'm noticing these particular trends, I'm noticing this information, let's have a conversation about that, and how can we build the capacity of your staff in terms of what we're seeing here. So I appreciate the question about accountability, and so those are the measures. It's responsibility. We also have opportunities for central staff, and again, it's the folks that you're seeing in the room with us today. We're engaging in conversations with teachers and with principals on an ongoing basis. One of the things we need to keep in mind around universal design, differentiated instruction is that it still needs to change year by year. You can be a teacher with 20 years of experience doing wonderful work around universal design, and then you have a different student who enters your program, and you're going to have to create something right from the beginning. It's not as though, oh, here's a student with this profile, I'm going to pull out my this profile book and start to deliver a program. We have a baseline of strategies, but then as Lisa was talking about student profiles, I think Sambal mentioned student profiles. So you're going to have to do something specific to Jennifer and her learning needs. So how are we supporting teachers in doing that? I think that was the first proposal.
But I think if we're truly doing universal design, we shouldn't be making a program for Jennifer. We should be making a program for the whole class that will benefit Jennifer as well. So that's the missing piece, I think, with a lot of teachers, is they think that they're making a program for Jennifer, and they're not. It's a program that all of the students can benefit from, and it also benefits Jennifer, right? That's the whole.
That is a great question and a wonderful distinction. I think as we're engaging in this conversation, it's kind of two pieces, right? Universal design, necessary for some and beneficial for all. But the differentiated instruction piece is the piece where we're really targeting how Jennifer learns. So the two pieces are happening simultaneously. And so you're right, if I'm saying I'm offering a variety of positions within my classroom, that would be universal design. If you need to stand, we have some standing spaces. If you need to sit, if you need to, there's our universal design. But in terms of the reading strategies that we need to implement, right, we're not going to have necessarily a universal design for reading strategies. We're going to have differentiated instruction and culturally relevant pedagogy for reading strategies. So it really does depend on what we're talking about. So those things kind of get a little bit confused. But again, this is why we have to continue to have conversations, because I'm so glad that you raised that. I really like talking about that distinction and really working that through and getting good questions about that. So thank you.
Dorothy?
Thank you very much for your presentation, first of all. The language for me falls back to inclusiveness and integration. And so with that said, for many years around this table, we have talked about accountability. We've talked about shared responsibility. What does that look like? Holding administration accountable for what's taking place in their schools. Attitudinal shift. If you have a child that's coming in from a block, 3 program and changing the teacher's perception. And all of this is taking place while learning is taking place for the teacher, for him or her to come up with a customized program that not just benefits Jennifer, but also benefits everybody. I am unsure if I feel as if we're still at the beginning stages. Even though the language has changed, it still represents the exact same thing. Having a child come in that's identified, and I find that my temperature is a little bit high. I'm rubbing a little bit high because we're still at that same place, right? You have kids coming in, teachers who are learning new ways of approaching that child, and they're learning. They also have to shift with their thought process of what this child comes with. And all things being equal, it would be a great learning experience, but that's not what's happening on the ground. You guys are operating at a very high level. On the ground, what does it look like? And so we've been around this table for years, and it's the same conversation. When the child leaves school, when they're entering into, hopefully, whatever their choice is, their path is in life, are we giving them the tools that they need to live an enriched life? Do they have the tools, right? So the child now comes with whatever their profile looks like. You have the teacher who is getting up to speed. You have the principal who may not be accountable. I'm not saying that that is the case, but may not be accountable. And you still have this child in the midst of all of this. And when they leave school, what are they leaving with? So forgive me if I'm coming across a little bit jaded, but I think, Shelley, it's been 16 years? We've all been here. And it doesn't feel as if we've really, truly moved the mark. We have different language to identify what inclusiveness looks like and what integration looks like. And when everything is said and done, when the child leaves grade 12, do they have the tools? We're still talking about a shift in attitude. We're still talking about, is the principal truly being accountable? And who holds him or her accountable? And you may have these other, you may have all the things in play to hold him or her accountable. But what does that really translate to? And I've had this conversation in the past where I've said, okay, the child is coming in from about 3 program into the high school space. What happens to the individual who is actually exiting school? They're still leaving with what? Are we truly making a marked difference? And it always seems to end up right there. Who holds the, lack of a better word, the police officer accountable for his or her bad behavior? You have the principals who are supposed to do, or the administrators who are supposed to do whatever it is that we've all identified. Does that really mean that that's what's happening? And everybody knows that the system is always operating at a fast pace. We're operating at a deficit. We don't have enough. We never have enough. And we do our very best to make a difference. But there's always individuals falling in between the cracks. So I love your presentation, don't get me wrong. But it truly feels like we're still at the beginning stages of things after 15 years.
Dorothy, I want to thank you for your candor, for sharing, for saying what you're truly feeling and thinking and experiencing. I think maybe your voice is speaking for some other people, whether it's folks in the room or folks that might hear this message elsewhere. There is a frustration in terms of the rate at which these changes are happening. No doubt about it. And there's an urgency. There's a need for it to happen now. We're working on building capacity, but we can't say, well, we'll have the capacity built in 5 years because we have students graduating year over year who need the skills to be successful in life, to have a fulfilling life, as you described. So the heat that you're expressing in terms of the deep-seated concern, the worry about outcomes for students is felt and it is shared by all. Please know that I can say certainly for our team and for those of us who are at the table, and that's speaking to why we keep coming back to the table. Even after 6 months and 6 years and 16 years, we keep coming back because we're committed to the work, because we know it can be done, because we know how important it is for it to be done. So we're going to keep talking about accountability and trying to make it so. We're going to keep talking about inclusion and trying to make it so, because it's the only option for students to have a positive experience in their schooling and a positive experience in their life. So please don't, apologize for feeling what you're feeling, because it's passion. And I like to think that passion is what drives us to do this work and to continue to have these conversations and to listen to what's hard to hear. And what's hard to hear is that it's not always done correctly. It's not always a situation that works out very well or as well as it should for any given student. When we find out a situation where something didn't work well, we do our best to correct it and do so immediately and try to make sure that it doesn't happen again. But we can't deny that it's not yet a perfect system, and we have a way to go before we can even say that we are completely and utterly efficient in preparing students for life after school. We have a ways to go. There's a full acknowledgement of that.
Jennifer, did you have something else to add?
Thanks, Dorothy, because you're speaking for me as well. It's same frustrations. And when we talk about accountability, and something you said struck me strongly, is that when we talk up here in this room, it's very different than what's going on the ground. And I want to know how often, and I mean, maybe that's part of our accountability, people in this room, how often you're in a classroom that has a student with needs, and you're seeing how that student's being treated, and just popping in and things like that. That's the kind of accountability, understanding what these students are actually facing on a day-to-day basis would be really helpful to know that you've been to 20 classrooms this year and you've seen, out of those, 10 of those teachers are doing amazing work, or none of them. How is this working, right? How is it truly working? Because like Dorothy said, it's been many years of similar presentations, and all of our people we represent, it hasn't changed for them.
Jeff?
Yeah, in reference to Dorothy, it seems like nobody is disagreeing with what Dorothy's been saying. So what have we identified the failings of the system and possibly of the people involved or the people who are intended to execute the system? And if we do have an idea or specifics on where we're failing, do we have is there a plan to go after these problems? Is this a matter of resources? Jennifer's, comment about the teachers, the day-to-day experience in the classroom. We don't necessarily want to, target particular vocations or particular individuals, but do we understand why this is happening in the classroom? Why these things aren't, effectively being done? And I'm guessing that other people in the past have said this over the years, asked these questions. So, what are we able to do at this committee to have this change and improve? And and my understanding of the thing that might be slowing us down could possibly be that there just isn't enough funding overall in general, or happening, and how much are we able to affect that? I just got elected, so I'm hoping that I will be able to have a better understanding of how this all comes together and when it doesn't come together. I have a lot of questions in what I just said, so I hope I can get something out of it.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah. I think it's just pointing, it's pointing out there's a continual need for communication to happen between central board office and the principals and the teachers. There's a continual need for that communication to be rich and robust, and the expectations and that the direction that the central board is going in be communicated clearly, and also not just with staff but with parents, because many parents out there have no clue of what the initiatives of the board are. They don't know. They haven't been told. So I think it's really important that those lines of communications continue to be clear and transparent, and so that parents going in and asking questions, asking why something isn't happening in the classroom, sometimes that's an indication to the teacher that, well, maybe I need to go and I have to ask some more questions. Just my 2 cents. And I saw Jazzy with her hand up. Go ahead, Jazzy.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to go back to the last meeting we heard from, I think her name was Simon, right? She talked about the process, and if a parent has a question or concern or has, a need for their child, to follow the process of engaging the principal and working through it with the principal and kind of coming up with that resolution. We heard a lot of that. And then we heard a lot about accountability today. And I think that there's like a bottleneck. I'm not saying all principals or all teachers, but there must be at some point a bottleneck with some schools. Some parents might face, and I think that there needs to be like a one removed team or people. And I know that there's not resources and the staffing and leveling and all that. But I think there needs to be some sort of one removed that's looking into the schools, because if it's your home and your shop and things aren't going well, you're going to sweep things under the rug, right? Because again, you want your data to look good because you're as good as your data is. And if you're representing your schools phenomenally, there's really nothing to work through with the superintendent, right? Because you're doing a great job with your school. And I'm going to hazard a guess. I'm going to see the good in everyone, but I'm going to hazard a guess and say that there might be schools where that's happening, because I've heard from other parents where they faced uphill battles approaching, the administration. So I just think it's more of a comment and just kind of, piggybacking off of what Jennifer had mentioned earlier. I think there needs to be some sort of accountability or second level or layer looking into the data and how they're reporting on the progression of their school and how they're meeting those needs.
They did being very
Passionate.
passionate. Yeah, that's a good word. Okay, with that, no other questions, no other comments? So I'm gonna ask Dorothy to move for receipt. And Jesse, would you like to second that? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're moving on to mental health and well-being, which I think, you know, all these previous reports, they do affect mental health and well-being of our students. So we're gonna move on to 8.5 and
welcome Janet Chakowski, Senior Manager of Social Emotional Learning, to speak with us about the mental health and well-being strategy that is currently being designed, the committees, the parent consultation that's been undertaken during the course of this year. And yes, I think that mental health underpins everything that we're doing in education because it's part of the whole person and part of the intersectionality, right? Education, you have your gender identity, you have your intellectual profile, you have your family profile, and of course you have your mental health state, right? So we're happy to have Janet with us to share that information this evening. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Chair. Good evening, through you, Chair. I'm Janet Chakowski, Acting Senior Manager, Social Emotional Learning. Valerie Anderson, who's our mental health lead, sends her regrets tonight. She's not feeling well. Tonight I'll give a brief report on the mental health and well-being work of the Peel Board. Today I'll be talking about the current supports available for students in the PDSB, the Children's Mental Health Month, community connections, highlights of updates to the Suicide Intervention, Prevention, and Postvention, or SIP guidelines, and update on the PDSB mental health strategy and action plan development. In this section, I'll be speaking about current supports available. I'll try to address some of the questions raised to Superintendent Newby during previous meetings. You may also refer to the full agenda package for more details, as this will be an overview of supports. Mental health and well-being work in the PDSB is focused primarily on creating protective factors. This involves work from all departments and all schools to create identity-affirming, representative, and welcoming classrooms and schools. The Central Mental Health Support personnel, including school-based social workers and psychologists, the Mental Health Resource Team, and Social Emotional Learning Resource personnel, provide professional learning resources to school staff to support mental health and wellness promotion in schools. All students have access to the Be Well student resource website, which includes up-to-date counseling group offerings, links to helpful resources, and lists to community resources, including identity-specific resources. Guidance, resources, and training are available at no cost to schools from School Mental Health in Ontario. When students are experiencing mental health distress, there are several in-school supports available, including administrators, guidance teachers, education assistants, and child and youth care practitioners who can provide non-clinical supports. Clinical staff who are registered mental health professionals, such as social workers and psychologists, can provide counseling services to students individually and in groups. Although there are a wide variety of qualifications and educational pathways for clinicians, such as Bachelor or Master of Social Work, Master of Counseling Psychology, registered psychologist, registered psychotherapist, or others, staff providing mental health supports must become a registered mental health worker or be supervised by a registered clinician. Each social worker or psychologist is assigned several schools depending on size and needs, usually between 5 and 7 schools, and support student review meetings. They provide consultation, counseling, and assessments. Students 12 years old and up can self-refer to counseling services through the Be Well support line. Identity-specific supports are also available to students and families upon request. Students who require further clinical interventions may benefit from our partnership with Sick Kids Hospital, which provides telepsychiatry services, and the mental health and addictions nurses who assist students who are experiencing mental illness or substance misuse and their families to navigate services and to experience success in school. Each May, the PDSB recognizes Children's Mental Health Week. PDSB has expanded this to include the entire month of May to give time to center well-being and to decrease stigma around mental health. The month is filled with activities and speakers for students, caregivers, and staff. The caregiver presentation supporting the mental health and well-being of our kids, presented by PDSB social workers, is planned for May 18th from 6 to 6:45. There are also 2 student-focused events, one presented by social worker Kevin Rambali and entitled The Intersections of Mental Health, and one from jack.org. There's a staff keynote address presented by the George Hall Institute. In addition to board-wide events, schools are encouraged to hold their own mental health and well-being events, speakers, and community outreach activities. This year, schools were able to apply for grants up to $1,000 each to support their initiatives. To date, we have awarded over $75,000 in grants to schools for this purpose. Many schools have fostered positive partnerships with community mental health organizations to support students and families. These partnerships assist schools to develop skills of coping and resilience in students and families and provide identity-specific supports as requested. The Mental Health Resource Team maintains as best as possible an up-to-date list of identity-specific community agencies and supports. Through the Collaborative Agreement Review Committee process, you may hear us refer to that as CARC, community agencies who provide clinical supports may apply to the committee to be approved for clinical work in schools. A few examples of this have included complex grief counseling groups for victims of human sex trafficking, and counseling for youth experiencing addictions. Through the CARC review, we have been able to expand the types and number of agencies working with Peel students in order to augment the high quality and diverse services already provided by PDSB clinical staff. Peel Public Health has partnered with PDSB to provide consultation and support around our mental health strategy and action plan, and to provide training for student groups at no cost. These include the Playground Activity Leaders in Schools, or PALS program for elementary students, and the Youth Empowering Students for Mental Health, or YES or MH, student groups for secondary schools. Peel has over 130 elementary schools and 15 secondary schools who have received training this year alone. PDSB staff retain memberships of several community committees, including CAMH, Peel Situation Table, Human Trafficking Service Providers, Child Abuse Review Panel, Diversity Table, and several others. Through these connections, PDSB has a voice in decision-making and action planning to provide collaborative and cohesive supports to students and families in Peel. The Suicide Intervention, Prevention, and Postvention, or SIP guidelines, are reviewed each fall by administrators in their schools so that all adults are aware of the process to go through if a student experiences or expresses suicidal ideation or intent. A writing team was convened to review the current SIP guidelines and to update them to reflect anti-racist, anti-ableist, and anti-oppressive framework. Some highlights of changes to the draft document include changes to some terminology, more fulsome guidance for administrators, and a focus on an alignment with our board improvement and equity plan, and more inclusive language and strategies to support students with disabilities. To support our SIP plan, the Cecil Department has increased the number of suicide intervention and prevention trainings available to PDSB school staff over the last 2 years to make up for trainings that could not take place during the COVID-19 pandemic. These have included several sessions of ASK, which is Suicide Risk Assessment for Children 4 to 14, during the 2021 to 22 school year, monthly sessions of Safe Talk and Assist, or Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, held in a variety of board locations to increase accessibility, and the START online SIP module. The goal is to have at least 2 assist-trained staff in each school, as well as several Safe Talk-trained staff, so that there is greater capacity to respond and to get a student to professional help if they have expressed suicidality. Finally, with the guidance of School Mental Health Ontario and the PDSB Core Mental Health Leadership Team, a new mental health strategy and action plan is developed every 3 years. The PDSB is currently developing the 3rd strategy since 2013. In the fall, after pausing the strategy development during labor disruptions and the COVID pandemic, the Core Mental Health Leadership Team started planning for the new strategy. In February, the 4 advisory groups, students, parents and caregivers, community and faith leaders, and staff convened to begin work on the new strategy. The data and input collected from these advisory groups was examined and narrowed by the steering committee. The advisory groups will examine the 3 draft priorities in a meeting later this week, and the final strategy will be presented to the board in May for approval. Following this approval of the strategy, planning will begin for the Year 1 action plan, which will launch in September 2023. On this slide, I've included the School Mental Health Ontario key elements of their strategy for your perusal. On this diagram, you can see the large focus on school level Tier 1 supports, which is where we are focusing our work for the new strategy and Peel. It is here for your reference, and if you would like to delve more deeply into this, you can see it on the School Mental Health Ontario website. Thank you, Chair, and I'd be happy to answer questions at this time. Sadko?
Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. I was just noticing that you said $1,000 grant and 75,000 has been given. So May is approaching next week. So are we still expecting some more applications from the schools for this grant?
Through you, Chair, no, we've closed applications. We gave about 3 weeks for schools to put together their proposals and put in their applications, and then the committee took a look at those and approved. Frankly, we approved all of them. All the schools who applied did have appropriate events. We did have some that we wanted to tweak a little bit, where we wanted to make sure that students and families were aware of and supporting the various activities that the schools were planning. So we did give guidance that way, but we did approve funding in all cases.
So just a follow-up, Chair, the school who didn't apply, they're not doing anything, or they don't need the money? Do you know?
Through you, Chair, I'm not sure. I can't speak for the other schools who did not apply, but we did publicize widely. But we did have some schools reach to us and let us know if, for example, like a community evening or something that they were going to have at their school that didn't require money, but they did ask us to have members of our mental health resource team present to hand out flyers and to talk about the different supports that were available in Peel. So there are schools that are doing events that don't cost money, but I can't say that's the case for every school. But we have encouraged every school to have their own local events, and we are, for example, the student presentations are live streamed during the day. So individual students or classes can sign up to view those live streamed during the day, and there's discussion guides provided by the presenter and vetted through our staff, so that those, if nothing else, we provide something that will come straight to schools.
Yeah, okay. I was just wondering if instead of application process, just $1,000 each school to, for the activities.
Through you, Chair. Trustee, how much money do you think we have?
I don't know.
I'm kidding. No, we actually, interestingly enough, we didn't think we would get the number of applications that we would get. Usually when we put out something, people are saying, it takes a bit to put together a proposal. So we actually had to shift around more money there, because we had originally said, well, we'll spend about 10,000, we'll do 200 or 500 here, depending on what people would like. But because it was such a good response and everyone asked for the maximum amount, we were able to shift money around and provide what people were asking for. But the danger in just giving money is that we're not then accountable. We want to support people who are generating their own initiatives and working with their school councils and their student body and their staff and community to create initiatives that work well for them. So if we want people to kind of take on and do the work themselves, and then we come and support them financially the best that we can.
Mark, who at the school applied for the grant? Was it the principals, some other staff members, school councils?
Through you, Chair, it was a variety. So some came from guidance, some come from administrators, behavior education assistants, class teachers. So we did only allow one application per school, so we asked them to talk amongst themselves. Many schools, it was the chair of their school improvement and equity planning committee who did the application, because we did, through our decision-making tool. We did ask them to link to their school improvement and equity goals through the student well-being section. So it was often the chair of their seat committee that provided the application.
And were any of the school councils aware that this funding was available? Like if you sent out an email, were school councils included in this email?
Through you, Chair, we didn't email school councils directly because this was sort of a school-based initiative, and we encouraged people to consult with their local community, their students, their staff, their parents, but not necessarily through the school council process.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Jennifer, you have something else?
Yeah, the SIP guidelines, you said you had translations for parents, documentations for parents. How would parents go about finding that?
Through you, Chair, we do, when the new guidelines are approved, and we're not quite there yet, the translation guides, or sorry, the documentation and translation of that documentation will appear on our mental health website. So in the agenda package where I linked the to the mental health month, where it says this is the link for the speaker, that actually links you to our external mental health resources page, our external page, and that's where we'll house it. So everything, if you're to go onto the board site and put in mental health counseling, suicide prevention, everything will get you to the same page.
Okay, great.
Jasmine?
I think mental health is so important because it's an invisible illness that we often gets overlooked. And a lot of parents in our community might not know that they might be suffering or that their child might be suffering. And I think it's phenomenal that even the schools that didn't participate in the grant are still going to get something coming down from the board. Is there resources that are going to be shared with the parents through May?
Through you, Chair. Yes, we always have resources available on our external site, and the students, each student has a little round picture on their chiplet on their BYOD site that links to the Be Well site, and there's sections for students and parents on so every student has access to that. Then there's resources available there, but we always have the links to School Mental Health Ontario, the links to help finding pathways and resources available on our external site, so that people can find resources all the time, and as those resources are updated and become available, we actually have a dedicated member of our mental health resource team, and part of her allocation is to continuously work with communications and update that external site. We do also run specific events for parents. A lot of times they're identity specific. Sometimes there's a request from a family of schools, and we would provide support. We've done an event, actually we're gearing up to part 3 of the Black Healing event, so parent events board wide. We've presented in the Grant family of schools, the Gill family of schools, like many family of schools have had us, our teams of the combined with the school-based PSSP school-based staff and the mental health resource team working together to create community presentations, and at every one of those presentations we'll have resources and pathways help finding for parents and caregivers as well.
I think it's great that you have, because I think in the community that I'm in, parents will jump to show up in person because they may not know how to navigate online or how to do it digitally. And so I think, depending on the demographic, because I've seen it in school events where they'll show up at 9 o'clock, 8:45, like at night, like book fairs, like it's, and that comprehension and understanding is there in person and they want to be there in person. And so I think depending on the demographic that, and I know we talked about this last meeting too, that sometimes digital always doesn't work for the community. Thank you for sharing.
Yes, and again, through you, Chair, we do, when schools request or family and schools request in-person events, we do support that way as well. We did do one very recently at the Woodlands, and we're finding a lot of tension there between, students who are quite high achieving students and their wants and desires and needs for their pathway forward and what their parents were wanting for them. So parents, for example, wanted a specific program in a specific school, and the student said, well, I'd like to keep my options open. Maybe I want to do this or this or this, not just that. And so we had some identity-specific clinical staff go out to, social workers go out whose identity, very closely matched that of the request from the school and the community. And so that they could speak from not only a social work and mental health perspective, but from a cultural perspective as well. And they did go in person to have those conversations at the request of the school.
Thank you. Oh, Jennifer, did you have something?
Just, when we were talking about accountability just earlier, I'm thinking, so this year you got 75 schools, I don't think 275 or something, 30% of the schools. Will you track that, and then when you do this again, are we getting the same 75 schools that are actually participating, doing these things? Are we gonna reach out to the schools who didn't? Like, these are some of the accountability things maybe we can do to ensure that all of our students are getting the same sort of access to these types of events.
Through you, Chair. This was the first year that we've offered the grants. So we'll have a discussion amongst the Children's Mental Health Committee about how that went, how it was received, any feedback that we get. And we're always going to be looking for the process to improve the following year. But we do, we do sort of, not sort of formally, but we do sort of keep track of the hotspots and where, we can offer support, and our PSSP team is actually they're creating capacity building groups. They'll go out to some of those hotspots. So not so much tracking around the grants, but really tracking around where are the biggest needs in the board. And some schools who are doing very, very well will say, okay, we're gonna have $1,000 and we're gonna get a speaker and whatever. Another school that might not be doing well at all, we might be working with them throughout the year, month on month, day on day, family schools presentations, in school presentations. The social worker and the psychologist will be working with staff, and the guidance will be working with them, and so on. So I think maybe application for grant might not be the measure that schools are doing something, sort of thing. But through our mental health strategy and our action plan, we are building in accountability measures there those will all be made public. So, if we have our 3 priorities, for the next 3 years, we have our year 1 action plan. Every part of that action plan has what does success look like, and how will we measure that success, whether it's empirical data and anecdotal data. We have to have accountability measures for those, so they will be in place.
That's great. And you have a way to identify the schools that aren't reaching out?
Through you, Chair, we do, but usually we do hear from superintendents as well, and we sort of, through Superintendent Newby and Associate Director De Silva, if there are schools who seem to be struggling but don't really know where to look for assistance, usually the superintendent is quite aware of that, and they'll connect with either me or Superintendent Newby or Associate Director De Silva, and we'll make those connections.
Okay, thank you.
Jackie, would you like to move from Rosita's report? And Jennifer, would you like to second that? Thank you. I think those reports were actually, oh my goodness, all the amazing discussion we've been having. I think to all the staff that have come, I mean, it's, wow, great. We're going to move on to communications, and there is, this is just for receipt. There's the PAC on SEAC Resource Guide on Special Education Funding. This is a great little resource for some of our newer members. And it's the parent, I forget what.
Provincial Parent Association Advisory Committee.
Yeah, that's what that is. And on a monthly basis, and they've come up with some resources for CF members. Barb, would you like to move over seat? Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Anna, would you like to speak it? Okay. Ted, do we have any reports from representatives of councils and associations, or like would include number 11, which is questions asked of them by committee members? Jennifer.
Sorry, I'm talking too much tonight. A quick question about, there was a letter sent to the board from Easter Seals regarding National Accessibility Week and Red Shirt Day. It was sent early in 2023. They haven't heard back for whether PSB is interested in participating in that initiative to support students with physical disabilities. Just wondering if that.
Thank you. You said it was sent earlier this year?
Yes. I can resend it if I
Yeah,
copy of it.
that's exactly what I
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, okay, so I'll send that directly to you?
Yes.
Okay, and then the second question I had is I'm hearing from parents that there is, and I think we've talked about this before, there's a lot of parents, their parents being called about their children potentially being encouraged not to come to school when they don't have enough staff or resources. I'm just wondering if we are tracking this, if we're aware of this, how we're tracking it. Because everyone's entitled to be at school, and if this is happening, we need to be aware of it, we need to be documenting it, we need to be doing something about it.
100%. So indeed, students should be allowed to come to school, whatever the challenges are. Whether it's challenges with the student and what they're experiencing personally, or challenges within the school. I understand staffing issues where we have teachers who are off and vacancies, so there's a lot of competing challenges, but that doesn't preclude a student from being welcome to attend school on a regular basis. I am aware of situations where, and when I say situations, I'm thinking of specific cases. I can't say that it is happening at an extent that it's everywhere. I can speak to the specific cases that I'm aware of, whereby a principal has relayed to a parent that the student should not come to school because of some situation around the school. And so we do coach those principals to understand why that's problematic, why that's not acceptable, and we work with the principal and the family to ensure that the student can return to school and attend on a regular basis. I will say that there is plans for an update around a modified day. And modified day was addressed back in the fall, I want to say the fall of 2021. And the reason for taking a look at that was to address the propensity for students to either not come to school or have a very reduced day, where it was like parents are asked to come and pick up the child at 1 o'clock or pick up the child at 11 o'clock. They don't get to go to school for a full day. And that was intended for exactly what you mentioned, the accountability, the tracking, the involvement of the superintendent before a decision like that is made. So there is data now. So that was initiated again back in the fall of, I want to say 2021, to create a process whereby if you as a principal felt that a student would benefit from a shortened school day, there were a number of steps that you had to take. You had to fill in a form. That form had to be signed by parents. You can't modify a student's day without consultation with parents, without the parent permission to do so, right? So we had all of that implemented in the fall of last year, and we're bringing forth some data around that because we wanted to see under what circumstances are students' days being modified. Is there a correlation in terms of areas, happening in some areas and less in others? So that's going to be data that we're interested in sharing with CF. So with regards, please do reach out to myself or the coordinating principals, or invite the parents to back to parent concern protocol. Please have them reach out to the principal, the superintendent. We have our coordinating principals by area. Erla Jacket manages the north, and George Sultanitis manages the central. Judy Richards manages the south. So there's a lot of people that a parent can reach out to if this is happening and they're not through the steps of the protocol, they're not getting satisfaction.
In this case, it was strictly, it was strictly resource-based. They did not have the staff available to accommodate the child in the class. And it wasn't, you can't, it was more of like, your EA is not going to be here today, so I'm not sure if you'd like to bring your child in, because there's no one going to be there to toilet them or to, that kind of thing. So I don't think it really went through that protocol. It wasn't what you're talking about. It's more around the problem we have with our resources with EAs and teachers like you talked about. So it's, it doesn't really fall under that tracking. So that's why I'm wondering if we're aware of how big this problem is. And it's, if that kind of, if that's being tracked and people are, and you're aware that this is actually happening in the schools.
So absolutely, and like I said, but in the same instance that you're aware, right? So somebody, there's no way for me to know that, right?
Yeah.
Outside of somebody reaching out and letting me know or letting my team know. And that's the piece that we were saying around coaching for principals. So on the one hand, I appreciate, and I think that parents do appreciate being told something. I know a lot of parents are like, could you please have called me and told me that my child's EA was not going to be there today? They just, so we started out, I started out well in terms of communication, but going down the road of, and kind of leaving it like, so what are you going to do about it, parents? And that's and that's not what we are trying to convey, right? If you're calling the parent to inform, that's one thing. You're going to get that information, that's fine. But I'm hoping that the principal perhaps has a plan. So we're going to do this, or so there's going to be a change in the schedule in this way or that way, or I just wanted to make you aware because, if things seem a little bit different today, then that might explain it. So I think it's about that coaching conversation and the intention to welcome the child to school every day, even on the days where we're short-staffed and there are other people for the principal to reach out to do that, right? But again, we can't, in terms of the tracking, and we cannot know unless we're told. There's no way for us to know in terms of whether or not a principal has a replacement for an EA in school on any given day, and whether they gave that communication to the parents. So as part of our ongoing conversations, coaching with principals, supportive principals, we talk about how you might problem solve around this, how you might address some of these challenges. And again, they have great principal colleagues they can call within the department to get some advice and some support.
Anybody else?
Okay, that's right.
Oh, sorry.
I have a question, but I'm not sure if I have the.
Are we gonna allow Wes?
Allow
Are you gonna allow Wes to?
Oh. The question I had, I don't have a lot of direct experience with the PLASP program, but the Peel lunch and after school program, but I wondered if PLASP has an obligation to accept students of varying, regardless of exceptionality or disability, or do they have the luxury of not taking a child if it creates a higher resource demand on their end? I assume, since they're sort of the single source provider, that they have obligations to the board, but anyway, that's my question.
Does any of the staff have any ideas? The committee?
No, not
Maybe we'll, yeah. Yep. We may just respond at some other time, but we've heard you, Wes. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right. Yes, we're going to move on to 12, which is our staff-led consultation. 12.1, the psychoeducational assessment spring 2023 process.
So very excited to have with us this evening Dr. Andrea Myrie-Nurse, who is one of the managers in the north of our psychology department, and Dr. Romy Gill, who is our manager in the south, again, of our psychology department. And so we've invited them here to bring greetings from psychology. Dawn Addison, our coordinating principal for psychology, is not with us this evening. She's not able to attend. She wasn't here today. But they're also going to be speaking in conjunction with coordinating principal George Sultanitis. And they're going to talk about some updates and changes to the process by which we are taking a look at assessments, in particular criteria for gifted assessment, or perhaps criteria is not the word, considerations around gifted assessments. And they're also going to talk a little bit about the process for determining whether or not the board would move forward with a psychoeducational assessment. So this is part information and part consultation. And I want to be clear on that piece because, again, it's down and around staff-led consultation, which we really think is important. We're looking for your voice, we're looking for your questions, we're looking for your suggestions. And just for your awareness as well. And so it's also information. So it's part information, part consultation, and I will turn it over to the team to share with us this evening. So thanks again, guys.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So I'm going to start off by giving a overall context for our centralized psych assessment process. We might have heard ACC here before, which stands for the Assessment Consultant Committee. That is a committee that is basically reviewing all psych assessments that are referred in our system, and then looking at this in a process of high needs, high risk in terms of their academic pathways. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but I want to give you some background information. So I would say in about fall of 2022, we were definitely concerned, of course, for about the number of assessments that we had in the system. The issue of recruiting psychologists in schools, so school psych staff has been a challenge across Ontario, I would say, across school boards. I'm sure you've heard about the high demand and the lack of resources when it comes to school psychologists. This has, in many school boards, resulted in long lists of assessments that need to be completed, and different school boards trying to figure out a method to address all these needs. When we looked at our system, we saw that there was definitely a concern around schools working in silos, and we wanted to make a change around that. The word of the evening to me sounds like it's accountability, and so we were looking at a system that could hold us accountable in terms of what was happening with these assessments. And of course, looking at issues around equity was a big piece of that. So we developed a proposal back in the fall to present to the system about how we could address some of these issues. In February, actually, the Right to Read report came out, which I'm sure most of you or all of you are familiar with. And it gave, in addition to our proposal, a lot of recommendations that came about. And I know the Right to Read specifically addresses reading and learning disabilities around reading, but it also addressed the general issue of psychological assessments and how to address them. And one of the recommendations around this was having a transparent process around assessments, having a centralized waitlist for assessments, and having criteria or at least a process in which if anyone was to ask why this assessment was completed or put higher on a list versus this one, there's an explanation. Someone is able to tell you why, and it's based on some consistent criteria that is applied to all kiddos in all schools within the system. All of these recommendations to the Right to Read have been implemented in our ACC process. there, at the time when the Right to Read report came out, there were only 2 other school boards in all of Ontario that had a centralized system, and they were very small school boards. So the fact that we have come to the table to develop a centralized system for such a large school board is quite, I would say, forward thinking. We're ahead of many school boards in terms of having implemented this. We piloted the system in January. So it was approved, we decided to pilot it to see how it would play out. And that process has been started since January. Andrea's going to talk, I think, a little bit more about the details around how the committee works, so I'll pass it along. All right.
Okay, yes, Romy and I thought it would be really beneficial for us to just kind of give you all a little overview as to how this process works from the ground level. So each school, as you know, has an assigned psych staff. Psych staffs have between 5 to 7 schools, and although they're assigned to schools, they're basically servicing the superintendency in terms of the assessments to be completed. When a psych staff attends the SRM, they are to complete the referral forms in collaboration with the ISSP teacher or the spec ed head or CERTs and the principal. Once the referral form is complete, it is submitted into the AECC referral list for the superintendency. At that time, once completed, Rummy and I will then organize or schedule a meeting for each superintendency to review all the referrals for that period of time. And the committee, but I hope I'm not going to go jumping all over the place because I really want to be succinct in how I present this. The committee approves the referrals and then weights the assessment. It's very important, as Wami said, that if they are weighted, to determine the urgency and the impact of the assessment for the students' programming, the risk for the students, and the impact to the school and students. Once we have assigned or we have approved the referral, the psych staff then contacts their office assistant, who will then assign them a number of assessments that they would like. They would say, I'd like 4 assessments. The office assistant will take from the top in terms of priority, in terms of the weight, from the top, and then the psych staff will then contact the school for them to then create the consent to be sent home for the parents to then sign, return, and the process of the assessment can begin. Okay, so that's basically a really simple overview of how things are done. Now, the ACC is comprised of myself and Rummy. We are the chairs of the ACC. There's the superintendent or an assigned administrator, coordinating principal, the psychoeducational consultant in that superintendent, and a CERT. And collectively, we will come together to review those referrals and make decisions in terms of, we will review the child's profile, the supporting data for the child, in terms of their strengths and needs. And collectively, we will determine if we will proceed to an assessment, and we will assign a weight. And again, that weight is from highest to lowest. And that's how they appear on the list, from highest to lowest. Then we will make recommendations for the schools in terms of supports and resources. And as the chair, they are responsible for the final decision. But basically, it's very much collaborative. So, George.
Okay, so to address some of the system needs and ensure that students.
So sorry, George, can I just ask and just make a suggestion that we pause in case there are any questions, because there's two different pieces here, right? So that was the information piece around the ACC process, and I just want to pause and double check and check for understanding and give people an opportunity if there are any questions about that piece before we move on to
Dorothy? Thank you for the clarification. If I understand the information correctly, you give priority to requests coming in for a psych assessment. With that said, there will always be a child at the bottom of the list. At what point in time does the person at the bottom gets catapulted to the top, given the fact that there's always someone who's in need?
So what we're finding is happening, so what was happening before is decisions were being made about assessments without any transparency. And if you look at the right to read, this isn't a Peel board problem, this is a problem across the whole system, right? The Right to Read report really did a fantastic job of trying their best to assess these issues across. And what was happening is kiddos, because we have limited resources, kiddos were getting, the kiddos that were getting assessments was not because of their profile. It was often found that it was because of parents who's maybe a stronger advocate or some other behavioral concern more, so that the school was under stress. And it wasn't actually being done in this transparent, consistent way. The concern was, of course, all the biases that are involved in that. And then comes into play concerns around, biases that might address racialized children and so forth. So we had to look at a system that could, not a perfect system, but would at least be able to address some of these really problematic processes and practices that were taking place across the board. We don't have, so the system that we developed, the referral form that we developed it with tech, with our tech department. It is highly sophisticated. The tech department did an excellent job of translating what we needed into a program where we can capture stats so effectively. Because it's pilot, we're hoping that this summer is when we will get a chance to work with IT to actually look at all these stats. The issue, again, before was that there was no way to capture stats when everybody was doing their own practice based on each school. Now that has been taken away, and we can actually look at when the assessment was referred, what was the complexity of the situation, what was the decision of the committee, how long did it take to be picked up, how long did it take to be completed, how many kiddos are left on that wait list, would we be able to get to these kiddos in a reasonable amount of time? The average amount of time, although the Right to Read report said it was inaccurate for assessments to be completed, across most wards was over 600 days, right? So that's 2 years plus, and that's not even accurate stats, because like I said, most schools do not have a centralized system. What Andrea and I are noticing right now, and again, this isn't, I think Jennifer had said that she would welcome us back once we've done this to present to you a fulsome presentation about this process with our statistics. But looking at what we're seeing in terms of numbers, we're happy to say that we feel that by the fall, the wait list that we've produced just this year, we should be able to complete those kiddos by the end of the school of this year, right? That wait list should be cleaned up. Now, mind you, more kiddos would be coming in, but the point is that come September, we would be able to clear that. Yeah. So there wouldn't be those kiddos at the bottom of the list that keep being pushed down.
Yeah. The kids on the bottom of the list that you're worried about, they will be seen, and that's the main issue. In the past, what was happening is that the children that were most complex were not the kids that were seen. and they were left year after year after year. This way, because of the weighting system that we have, the most complex kids are seen first. And if the school, say for instance, would like some information just for programming, they are pushed down below, but doesn't mean that with consultation with a psych staff, they can still program for the child. They might have to do some informal testing in consultation with the psych staff in terms of reviewing the OSR, reviewing the testing data that the school was able to gather, can still proceed to appropriate programming, and eventually that child will be seen. But it's really important for us that the most complex kids are seen and done in appropriate time.
I appreciate the information that you're sharing. There'll always be another child or more children involved in what you're speaking of. And so when you're speaking of complexity in terms of profile, again, there'll always be another child. Now, the individual that's at the bottom of the list, you still have more people coming into the system, which puts more stresses on the system with the same amount of resources to spread across the board. So I hear what you're saying, and in an ideal situation, I get what you're saying. But the realism behind it is where I'm coming from. With the amount of kids that, to my knowledge, was on the wait list eons ago, that perhaps even now have passed through the system and moved on out of the school system. The wait list for a psych assessment, to my knowledge, is horrendous. And I can appreciate the fact that you streamline the process. There's a centralized process now, which will make it more manageable. But I'm still coming from the point of view of the complexity of a child's profile will always dominate or push aside others that may not be as complex. There'll always be another child that has presents with more variances.
Through you, Chair Foster, if I may. I'm thinking that your comments are a good segue into the second part. So I remember I had stopped George. It's a full and everybody's there, and I paused George and asked him to wait to allow for some questions in response to what Remy and Andrea had shared. So would it be okay if we move forward? And I think that's where there's going to be a little bit more opportunity for some more discussion when we hear from George, and his piece is going to be talking a little bit more about how we're going to get from where we are today to where they just said we are going to be, which is by the fall, we've cleared a lot of the weight, right? So he's going to give us some insight as to how that might be, and then we can have another opportunity for some more discussion after that.
Thank you, Jennifer, and through you, Madam Chair. So to address some of these system needs and relieve some of the pressure, we are looking at a temporary change to the gifted identification process. So based on the current process, a psychoeducational assessment is required to determine whether student meets our board's criteria, our current criteria, to be identified as gifted and offer placement through IPRC. So due to the several factors that were mentioned, including impacts of COVID-19 and staff shortages, students who have been referred for psychoeducational assessments for gifted have yet to be assessed, and for other students have yet to be assessed, right? So in the summer of 2022, 100 students had a psychoeducational assessment completed. However, assessments are still proceeding for students that have been impacted by factors listed above. So the temporary change we are looking at would apply to students who currently have an assessment consultation committee referral for an assessment forgiveness. Using data, and the temporary process would be using data from CCAT 7 screening. A student who currently has been referred to ACC will have the opportunity to move forward in the gifted identification process if any of the following scores is at or above the 98th percentile. So we're looking at full composite, which includes verbal, quantitative, and nonverbal. Quantitative, nonverbal composite, verbal, nonverbal composite, or verbal, quantitative composite. So again, these recommendations, and I think in April 2021, as part of a review of the gifted identification process that our board uses, other school boards in the GTA were contacted to gain insight into what practices are used for screening and identification of gifted students. And we found that school boards in the GTA use only a screening tool for the purpose of determining if the student meets criteria to be identified as exceptional intellectual. So again, this is a temporary change in the process. And again, it's hopefully addresses the system needs of the ACC referral. So at this point, if there are any questions?
Barb? So will the students who meet this criteria then go directly to an IPRC in the same, in grade 4? Or the same year they do
This is
CCAT?
currently for students who are on the ACC referral list. Again, we're talking about, relieving the system needs, right? So there are currently students who are on the ACC referral list who meet this criteria, and they will be given the opportunity to go straight to identification IPRC, regional IPRC without a psychoeducational assessment, and based on that information, we would be able to identify a student and offer placement.
Okay, so some of the criteria you said was quantitative verbal. So what, are you adding these together and dividing them?
By 2. So again, we're looking at what other boards have used in the past. So full composite would be, obviously a full, you guys can speak about the scores themselves, but so quantitative and non-verbal composite would be an addition of quantitative and verbal and divided, I guess, average by 2, right? Is that correct? No? No. So this is why, very clear.
Your lifeline.
Yes.
But these scores are the CCAT scores.
These are CCAT
Yes.
scores. That's
CCAT
right.
scores. So the full composite consists of the verbal, the quantitative, and nonverbal
Yes,
areas. Then the quantitative / nonverbal composite.
yes.
Then we have the verbal, should be verbal or should be just verbal composite, or is it just nonverbal? Verbal. And verbal quantitative composite. So that's all CCAT scores. Percentiles, so it has to be 98th percentile.
Okay.
Sorry.
Some of these things, adding them together doesn't make any sense if they're not measuring the same things. So if a student has a verbal at the 99th percentile, but their nonverbal is not at the 99th percentile or 96th percentile, then they're not going to move forward. They're going to have to wait for a psychoeducational assessment. And I know that there's been students who are waiting 4 years for a psychoeducational assessment for giftedness through the school board.
Sorry, my understanding, and again, I'm just looking at the version that I have here. The language that you shared, George, if I can just repeat.
Yeah.
Just to make sure I heard it correctly too. If any of the following score is at or above the 98th percentile.
Yes.
Any,
Any.
not combined, not added up.
Not combined?
Any of them.
Oh, okay.
So I
Okay,
appreciate,
that's
and to be
much
fair,
better.
I'm glad you asked the question to clarify, because to be fair, you're not looking at anything, and I actually had to go back and say, hang on, what did, right? So we're just trying to share the information verbally, so please do ask if anything's not clear. But it's any of those, so if you got 98 in the full composite, you're going forward. If you got 98 in the quantitative, you're going forward. If you got 98 in the verbal, you're going forward. Any of those,
Okay,
right? Otherwise, it's
that
not,
makes more sense.
it's not an intervention to move things forward, right?
What does placement mean, when you say placement?
So again, a committee would decide what a placement would be a type of service, right? And so in some cases, placement to receive myself at the home school. In other cases, a placement may be considered an enhanced learning classroom. So depending on the student portrait, the decision would be made at that years.
Sounds in the ASC class, place on an IPRC decision.
Okay. It's a separate class.
Yeah, it's a separate classroom. From mainstream. He was in mainstream with support, and then he got placed, and I chose to take the placement.
I see we have an opportunity for some learning about the various placement options that's in the board here. Yeah. Maybe this be a discussion, an opportunity for training, Jennifer?
Absolutely opportunity for discussion, for conversation. I don't know if it's training, but certainly an opportunity for further conversation.
Yeah. And maybe, explain like the tiers again, like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Like a lot of us who have been here for a long time, we know the wide range of placement options. We understand the tiers of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I think you've indicated that there's some opportunities and you will learn as you go along, yeah. Does, Jennifer, you have?
Just a quick question with the weighting. What's involved in weighting these cases and the students?
So it's a number of different factors. I feel like I want to share something in terms of as a school psychologist and as someone, we spent a lot of time over the summer doing a lot of research around. So to develop this process, which I didn't mention before, we had a writing team, a working team to develop this, which was a number of psychologists in our system that worked over the summer with Andrea and I to research and look at, best practices and moving forward. Schools are now starting to, just like all this other change, understand how assessments, psychological assessments in schools have been used in a way that has not always been the most beneficial for children. The concern comes from over-pathologizing kids by using psychological assessments and making psychological assessments barriers to academic intervention, okay? Our new referral form, in addition to the new SRM process, together is coming to work to be able to make better clinical academic decisions about when a kiddo should be tested. So it's about timing, it's about their development, it's about a number of other psychological factors, it's about their social situation, it is about their engagement in school, it is about not only their academic performance, but it is about their social performance in school. So there's a number of factors that are being looked at when the ACC comes together to make a weighting decision. Clinical decision-making is not always black and white. So the guidelines we've provided to the team to think about are guidelines. They're not criteria because you can't put kiddos and what they're experiencing into boxes. But what you can do is provide some direction, some guideline, and some transparency to the process to ensure that biases are not being played out and we are practicing which is best practice and based on research about what they're saying is best for kiddos. So for example, we might have I'm just gonna give one example to demonstrate how we might make a decision. We might have a multiple language learner, and they might have come from a different country just about a year ago, and they are now struggling with language learning, right? English language learning. However, they've also just come out of COVID, and they were online for so long. Now, academically, they might be struggling. If I just look at the grades, or if I'm thinking, oh, we better test this kid because what's happening with this? Well, there's so much happening with this kiddo. Well, the committee would look at what interventions have been put in place in the classroom first, right? So that's where the accountability piece comes. These decisions are now not being made in the school only, right? Now the SRM committee is consulted on the referral, so we're getting their rich input into the information when the ACC committee is looking at it. So it's not that their input isn't there, right? It is there, it's for us to look at. And then we look at, well, here's some other, interventions that can happen first. Here are some screening measures that you could do in the classroom first before we jump to doing testing, which we all know is culturally biased, which does not capture multiple language learners in the best way, and is very likely to pathologize instead of accurately capture a kiddo's capacity to do academic work, right? So that's just one example of how weighting decisions are made. Is that?
Yeah, no, makes sense.
Okay. Jordan?
Me again. I understand with great clarity what it is that you're stating. What I am still struggling with is understanding what takes place for the child that, when you're speaking of guidelines, you're relying on the administrator and the school team to do their part. And once they've escalated it to you, you review the profile, make recommendations, send it back down to the school level to see if what you're recommending will help the child. And then the process goes back up to you again. All of that is a lot of time. And once you recognize time is not the child's friend, because this is a circular scenario where you're providing aid, sending the information down with the hope that the intention is being played out. So where I'm coming from with this is that child could very well have benefited from a psych assessment, and with not enough resources in the system, right, that child could easily fall between the cracks. To do a psych assessment is in the thousands of dollars to do it privately. And when you put that type of, for lack of a better word, when things don't go well for your child, most parents get desperate. So they may entertain spending $4,200 or $5,200 to get a psych assessment done to give the information back to the school for them to implement it. All of which still falls back to accountability. And at what point in time will the child that may not fit the criteria or the the definitions that you're putting forward to the school for the administrator and his team for it to play out? Time is not at the child's, it's not an asset, it's a liability, because while all of this is being played out, the child is still going through the system and getting older, right? Moving to the next grade, the same situation persists. Moving to the next grade, the same situation persists, with the hopes of finally one day, right, getting through to doing the psych assessment, or the parent get desperate enough where they drop the $5,200 to do it, to get the correct programming in place, because you need clinical eyes on the child to go through the assessment process to determine their strengths and weaknesses and come up with recommendations. So that's, I guess it's more of a statement in that I truly believe that there are children that's not being captured. Perhaps.
And I agree with you completely. I've worked at Peel Board for 22 years. I've seen a lot. I think that this system will really capture those kids that you're talking about. As Rami stated, by fall, all the kids that we have on the list will be seen. All of them, even the ones at the bottom of the list. We will have cleaned our list, which for 21 years, I have never seen before. I've cleared my school's list, but I've never seen where there are no kids, and then we start anew. And then we're able to at least cope. I do agree with you, everything that you have said, being in the system for this long. But this process, it's not only making the school accountable, because now they have to be careful. Who are they actually putting forth for an assessment? Assessing a child is not easy, and perhaps it might be nice for you guys to have maybe a little PD on what it is like to be assessed. It's not nice. When I sit across a child or an adult, I feel bad because I'm not allowed to show any kind of encouragement. I have to be very standardized in how I present the materials. I cannot say, good job, you're doing a good job. I cannot. And you see them struggling because kids are good at reading people and they can't read you, right? I feel badly for them. So now the school has to be accountable. Are you sure you actually tried everything within your school to provide the supports rather than the first thing you do is an assessment? Then it also keeps our staff accountable. We are now able to have accurate stats as to what a particular superintendency, what is happening within a particular superintendency, but each individual staff, what exactly are you doing? And that is, to me, priceless. So we will have them all done, even the ones that you are afraid of, like you're fearful for. We will have them done. And then we start anew. And now the expectations are such that everyone understands what is expected.
What's the recourse for a parent who, again, is caught in that loop that may not have made the list from the principal? You're speaking of accountability. So again, we're talking about the kids that got on the list. What about the ones that the parent believes should be on the list? Perhaps the pediatrician believes would benefit from a psych assessment. If you have other clinicians outside of the school board that's stating, yes, and here's the letter, bring it forward to say that your child would benefit from this. And perhaps the administrator is not of the same opinion. So that's what I'm talking about. To me, it is a fulsome scenario, right? Where good on and I say good. I think a psych assessment is a tool that's vital for a child that needs it, right? End of conversation, done. However, if that child doesn't meet, for whatever the reason, it could be attitudinal, it could be whatever, that the administrator believes that child shouldn't go on the list. What's the recourse? We're talking about accountability, and that has happened a lot.
So as Andrea and I are the chairs of this committee,
an administrator would not be able to make a decision of a kiddo not getting an assessment unless Andrea and I were in agreement with that. So a psychoeducational assessment, which is what clinical psychologists do, is I think we forget that it's actually, it's a clinical assessment. It's not an academic assessment. It's not a test that is done. It is actually tools that have been developed to diagnose, right? And just like when we go to a medical doctor, we want to make sure that if we're getting any kind of test, that we are getting the ones that we should be getting based on our symptoms. And that we're not, because if you look hard enough for pathology or problems, you will find it. And we have to be very mindful as clinicians, especially when we're working with children, especially when we're working with children from diverse backgrounds, especially when we're working with children who have an experience of trauma or, systematic, racism or any form of oppression. These tests do not do the best job of capturing these kids' weaknesses or strengths, right? And then it's not just a teacher doing it, it's now a doctor doing it who now can diagnose you. And now at a young age, you carry that diagnosis and that label for the rest of your life, potentially.
I understand ideas,
So-
clarity what you're stating.
So that's why those decisions around, like a principal saying to Andrea and I, that kid can't get the test.
I think I'll provide a little bit more clarity. I'll give you a scenario. If the child is presenting with a profile that would warrant an assessment.
Right.
And the principal, the team inside the school have met. The principal is also involved. However, there are other children within the school that has more pressing needs, for lack of a better word, presents with more variances in their profile. Then that child is trumped by the individual that has greater needs that would benefit. Both of them would benefit from the assessment, but one wouldn't make the list because there are others.
We're saying that they would make the list.
Yeah, they both would make the list.
And that the list, it's a pilot, right? So we need to give this some time to be played out, and we would bring stats back to you. But as Andrea and I are saying, we're looking at it now, what we're foreseeing is that we can address those kiddos on the list. So I think we might need to come back, because I can see why there's kind of like, how would that work? And I think it's because we probably need to come back and actually present it maybe, and present the whole process.
So can you just remind me when it really came into effect? Because I don't think we were doing it full on in September, October, November.
January.
Because you needed to talk to schools. Remember, anytime you do a change, you need to tell the principals and the teachers and everybody and communicate what's going on. And this is a significant change to the process. So it wasn't happening in September, it wasn't happening in October, it wasn't happening in November. Because the time was being spent to organize it, to bring superintendents on board so that they could understand all of these different pieces, right? And then it was run as a pilot. So it's possible that earlier on in the year, there would have been some difficult conversations and difficult situations being experienced by parents and schools because this process that is now underway had not yet been implemented. So we need some time, is what I'm hearing, for it to get caught up, to clear the situation, and then to see, because the expectation is that going forward, we wouldn't necessarily have anything that sounds like a no when a student's profile warrants an assessment. At most, it would be a not yet, but it wouldn't be a no. Everybody's going to get assessed without waiting for 2 years. We're not having this 600-day situation in Peel going forward.
I have to say that I'm surprised that the numbers are looking that good. Because like I said, over 600 days is the average, which we think is an underestimate, right? The right to read report says is we believe is an underestimate of how long kiddos are waiting. So given that we started this process in January as a pilot, and it looks like this, we're weary because until we finish it, we can't show you anything solidly, but we're saying, wow, did this really work like this well? Right? We're surprised. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that when we come back, we'll have good news.
Yeah.
Right?
And you have to understand too, it's clinically, but now there's more clinical impressions that is putting forth when it comes to referrals. The psych staff is the one in collaboration, but they're the ones that are looking at it from a clinical sense. It's not a matter of who is the worst child, or
craving
it's clinically, and both children there would be referral for both children.
Okay, we're gonna start with Barb, we're gonna move to Jazzy, and then we're gonna move to Jennifer. Barb.
Okay, is there a limited number of assessments that each school can request? And so if all the assessments are gonna be centralized, then you will be able to tell CF how many kids were assessed.
Yes.
How many are on a waiting list? Hopefully there's no waiting list. Because it's something that SEAC has been asking for years.
There will always be a waiting list,
Okay.
but we will be running through that waiting
Okay.
list. Right? There'll always be a wait for assessment, unless magically we can get.
Zero, but that means that people are not putting referrals in.
Yeah, there will always
That
be a waiting list.
never happened.
Okay, I got that. Okay.
Yeah.
So with the gifted kids, has this started or is it starting? When is this starting?
So, again, as part of the consultation, we brought it here, so we are ready to try this in the spring. So I would like to set communication out to the system sooner rather than later.
Okay, tomorrow, let's go.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think you're getting CX support in that. Jazzy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, Dorothy, right? I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think where you were going with that was, what if the administration is making the decision to not even put the child's name forth for the assessment, because the administration has now the ability, or they should have the ability to be able to make good decisions, because these psycho assessments can be traumatic, and not the most pleasant. And like you said, that assessment then might follow that child forever and ever and ever. So I think, Dorothy, what you were saying was, how do we make sure that the administration is making appropriate decisions? They're not trained doctors to do these type of first look glances and say, okay, this child should have an assessment. Some of them might come with a recommendation, some might not. It might be behaviors that they've observed in class. So I think that's where you were going, right? Was how do we ensure that the administration is equipped with understanding who should then move into your list?
So the administrator does not have control, and we cannot control the administrator. We won't even know unless the school staff, the psych staff comes to us and says, this is what's happened. I want to put a referral through, and the administrator is stopping it. That's the only way.
But it's the psych who does the referral.
Yeah.
So that clinical eye, no one else can fill out. So each, at the SRM, when the referral form is completed, it is with, the special education people, the teacher, the principal, speech language, social work, and psych. So a psych would say, this, if a kid's brought forward to SRM and it's presented, a psych would have that clinical lens and say, this kiddo needs an assessment. Let me collect all this information to complete a referral form for ACC.
Got it. So it's not the administration, but then that is then presented. So the symptoms or behaviors of that child's attributes, like all that is presented in this meeting in a bit. Okay.
And also the parent is also invited.
Yes.
Got it.
SRM, so they're involved in it as well. Yes.
Can I get some clarification? Sorry.
The school
We were
team,
gonna be moving on to Jennifer. Do you mind if we get Jennifer's before we come back to you to proceed? Because maybe Jennifer's question will answer your question. Yeah, sorry.
Probably not, I'm really. My question was, you mentioned that there are challenges around the psycho-educational assessment for different groups of people. And I know for the group I represent, it's been a real challenge, people with physical disabilities, nonverbal, this type of thing. And we used to have someone at ARNO who did a great job of doing these types of assessments. Do we have someone on the board that can actually do assessments on our students that have nonverbal, maybe fine motor, they can't check? My daughter has been through a psycho assessment, so I do understand the what is involved in it, and I know that my son, if we just use that, would never be able to go through that assessment physically, right? You can't do what you're asking them to do. So do you have someone on the board who can work with those students?
We don't have one person, in terms of one person with the expertise. We have a number of different psych staff that can provide capacity to others to help them to assess.
Okay.
So we do have psych staffs that have, what would say, the expertise to complete assessments for these little ones. But others that do not, or they don't feel comfortable, they then seek for supervision or some sort of guidance and capacity.
And the good thing about this system, just to add to what Andrew was saying, by consolidating it into the central process, we can then control the resources, right? So we can actually, this is a complex assessment. When we're reviewing it, we will know which of our staff can actually handle that assessment. So we directly would assign it. The same thing, different superintendencies have different demands for assessments, right? That makes sense. We are able to now shift our limited resources where we're seeing there's a higher need in certain superintendency for assessments than there is over here. We can now shift it because it's centralized, right? So that would be another option for us to do.
So the way you eliminated I understand how you changed the process and it's all centralized. Are you actually doing more assessments now, or are you eliminating some of the need for the assessments?
That's again, I think when we get the stats, we'll be able to say, but our sense is that we're getting more appropriate referrals.
That's the most important thing, is the appropriateness.
Thank you. Did that help clarify anything for you, Dorothy? No. We are getting close to 10.
I'll make it short.
Okay.
Can you provide me some clarification? The principal or the administrators are not a part of the team that would fill out the documentation that would then go to you?
So at the SRM, which happens at the school, often there's a.
So you're talking about the student review meeting?
Yes.
Right, I'm just saying that because we've been using the acronym and sometimes people who are listening are not necessarily familiar. So the student review meeting is the meeting that takes place at the school that's typically chaired by the school principal.
Yeah.
And in attendance would be a psychologist, sometimes social workers in attendance. Most often there's a special education central staff member, so a CERT or somebody from representing special education will be in attendance at a student review meeting, not all the time, but usually. Staff with responsibility for special education at the school. So if it's secondary, it would be your head of special education, spec ed head. If it is the elementary, your ISSP teacher. So just saying that this is the group, this is the team that meets at the school. So every time you're hearing the term SRM, it's that group. So you have your SRM meeting with the principals at, and then you have your ACC meeting. So just to give that a bit of context, please carry on.
Did that answer actually your question?
Yeah. So that's where I was going. That's exactly where I was going with my statement, in that if the administrator has determined that there is a profile over here that would trump another profile, I'm speaking from experience.
I understand what you're saying, and this is what I would envision, both in my time as a principal, although it was not in this board, but in my time as a principal, and certainly as I see this process playing out now. If I was in a student review meeting and we were having a conversation about Jennifer and the possibility of Jennifer benefiting from a psychoeducational assessment. And the principal feels strongly that that would not be a necessary step to take at this time. Don't think we need an assessment for Jennifer for this reason and this reason and this reason. What I'm hearing our manager say is the psychologist is there to receive that information, right? So the psychologist is there to receive that information. And if the psychologist says, well, I'm going to bring it forward to ACC and I'll let them know that you as the principal are thinking that maybe this isn't something that we need. And it's part of an ongoing conversation. It's not a principal decision in isolation. I think there's feedback. We'd also expect that the parents are there at that meeting. So there should be a dialogue between principal and parents about what's.
Parents don't attend those meetings, so the
You understand that the system has changed.
Yes.
So whatever it is that you've experienced or someone you know that has experienced, that is gone with this new process.
Because if you imagine a parent being at an SRM and a psychologist is sitting there and saying, I think your child would benefit from a psych assessment, and the principal is like, I disagree. You know, a parent is there to be part of that conversation, right? I have to say that this whole process that's been developed is actually to take away that power, I don't know what else to call this, from the principal and the school. That was the whole purpose of this. Now, is it perfect? And will there still be those really horrible situations where you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that the principal did this, or yes, but the system that's been put in place is actually to address exactly what you're saying has historically been a problem.
Can I recommend this then? Is it possible that you create some documentation for the parent to, like, what I'm looking for is the opportunity for readdress.
Yeah.
If the parents is saying, yes, the clinician may not say anything in the meeting because the principal is there, for whatever the reason, there's silence. Could there be a process in place to which the parent can then advocate, trump the principal? Appeal. You know, could there be something in place for accountability for the parent to say, I'm advocating on my child's behalf? And yes, the parent has the opportunity to go to the superintendent, but if there's no documentation there to advise them accordingly, they may not go anywhere with it. It may just stop right there.
Thank you for that suggestion. And so what I'd like to do is to take up this conversation in the next meeting, because there's an alignment there, because in the next meeting, we're going to be talking about the special education plan, right? Okay. And so there's an opportunity back to the whole, where are we putting this information? Where are we documenting? Where are we explaining to parents? Where can I go to look up the thing that says this is how this process is supposed to run? And if I have a concern, this is what I can do. We're going to be talking about that at the next meeting. So can we table this part of the discussion, and having heard the concern and the recommendation that there needs to be information for parents about what to do if there is
discourse.
Well, you know, discourse can be positive. What we're talking about here is the outcome. It's not the discussion that's a problem. So somebody saying I disagree, or I'm not sure, or I don't know about that, that in and of itself is not a problem. But to your point, if we're going forward 6 months and we haven't got a resolution, or a year we haven't got, that's when we're getting into an issue. But just having a discourse and having different perspectives in and of itself is not a problem. But again, I like the fact that even if there is disagreement at the table, you have a psychologist to at least bring it forward to another committee, an arm's length committee, who's going to look at the information and make an objective decision. But again, even if that comes back and it's a not yet, I think we can outline that information possibly as part of the special education plan or some other documentation. So if we can kind of pause it and bring it just in light of where we are. But I just, on behalf of myself, I want to thank you guys so much for coming and speaking with us. I know it's not something that you have done in the past, but we're really, I think I speak for everybody when I say, I'm very, very hopeful that you'll return because your perspective is highly valued. And of course, it was very much the George show this evening, so I want to thank you as well, George, bringing so many of those reports forward. Okay, over to you, Chair.
We have one last, I probably
Yeah.
keep it short.
Yeah, it's actually bookkeeping stuff. So I'm assuming that this is going to be on the motion action log, or is this going to be like a motion or on the next?
So there's no need for a motion around following up with the discussion because, and I'm not sure if we talked
Like on
about
the
this.
action
We have a schedule for the year, so back to the pack on SEAC kind of thing. We have agenda items that we try to get through every year. We have to do a finance talk. We have to, like, there's certain things that we really try to do. And so we have to, as part of our obligation under SEAC, we have to discuss the special education plan. We only have 2 months left. And these meetings until 10 o'clock are hard. So I was hoping that we would divide up the special education plan into 2 parts. Plus we have other reports and other consultations and lots going on. So no need to put it in the action motion log. We are going to discuss the special education plan, guaranteed.
Thanks, guys. I'm really impressed. I'm hopeful and I want to believe.
So Dorothy, would you like to move for receipts?
Sorry,
it's one item. Dorothy, would you like to move for adjournment?
No, one more
item. Motion action log, oh geez.
Yeah.
Okay, the motion action log, sorry, let's flip through this.
Okay, so I just wanted to share, I took the feedback from, I believe it was the last SEAC meeting where folks had said, in addition to sharing, who's doing the follow-up, can you put a little bit of information in the motion action log? And I've tried to do that today. So if you take a look at presentation at SEAC, so answering Barb Sears' questions, so question 1 and question 2. 1 2 presentation at SEAC by George, April 25th, 2023, and the IPRC process update. So I put some key messages about members receiving information in accordance to their roles. We talked about updates regarding any changes to IPRC provided to staff via board-wide communication, and IPRC meetings are held as needed. You saw George put up the schedule, the calendar of proposed dates. So I just tried to do a little bit. Again, it's not everything that George talked about because we don't have space here. But now that we've gotten our action motion log down to a manageable size, I took that feedback. So I just want to make sure that this is acceptable. Is there any other feedback about how we manage the action motion log, or have we got it down to a science at this point? That's sort of the question I'm putting out there. So I hope that this is working for us. Yes?
Okay.
So far, so good.
Excellent, okay. 14, adjournment. Jeff, Dorothy.